with the rise of the BRICS bloc and Chinese aspirations for global hegemony, we are headed for a civilizational war. Chinese, with their Confucianist mentality, we're dealing with the Orthodox bloc led by Russia, and we're going to be dealing with the Sunni Islamic world. And these are all civilizational rivals of the West, of a collapsing West, a West that is decohering both in the direction of woke leftist discourse and in the direction of a very reactionary right-wing traditionalism. The next regime of Iran is perfectly poised, both in terms of its civilizational history and in terms of its geostrategic situation, to be a bulwark against these civilizational rivals of the West, and also the greatest ally of Israel.
Welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules show. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and we are joined today by Jason Reza Jorjani, Vladislav Davidzon, and we are going to be talking about geopolitics today and what exactly is going on in the age of Trump when it comes to Iran, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, and we're just going to get it started right now. Once again, everybody, make sure to like, subscribe, and support this channel by going to patreon.com/breaktherules. This stream is being filmed in front of a live studio audience over here, and if you guys want to be part of this in the future, $20 patronage plus will get you that opportunity if you're around the New York City area. So anyway, let us start talking about how we got here. And specifically, let's start talking about the Middle East, Iran, for instance. Let's start with Jason. What exactly has transpired that led us to this current moment?
For the past couple months, we've been dealing with volleys between Iran and Israel. I was going to say missile volleys, but of course, it's the Islamic Republic that only has these highly ineffective ballistic missiles. And then the Israelis come in with their very high precision airstrikes. So we've been seeing that going back and forth. And in the last, October 26th, Vlad, I think, that the Israelis carried out the airstrikes in Iran.
Right.
So in the last several weeks since then, we've been waiting to see whether there's going to be another Iranian retaliation. For a long time, there was a lot of bluster from the regime that they would carry out what they're calling Sadegh-e-Se, True Promise 3, their third wave of missile strikes on Israel, which they had claimed would be several times greater in magnitude than the last strike. Interestingly, and to my mind somewhat disappointingly, the news came in 48 hours ago that the incoming Trump cabinet had passed a message through the Iraqis to the Islamic Republic, asking them not to carry out this missile strike until Trump has a chance to engage diplomatically with officials of the Islamic Republic. I hope this isn't true. I have reason to believe it is, especially considering the news about Elon Musk meeting with the United Nations ambassador of the Islamic Republic. So it remains to be seen whether the regime will abide by this request in the hopes of some kind of diplomatic engagement with Trump, or whether we're going to see this third massive missile strike by the Islamic Republic on Israel. I have to say, I hate to sound cynical, but I really hope that it happens. And I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu's second address to the Iranian people recently, which was superbly crafted, very charismatic, done with great tact and knowledge of the sociological situation in Iran. That speech was the speech that you give before you carry out a major operation. And it was implicit in between the lines of that address to the Iranian people that Netanyahu was expecting another strike from the Islamic Republic, and then very shortly thereafter, some kind of Israeli response, which would ideally facilitate a change of regime. Right? So this mechanism would have to be set into motion probably by another Iranian strike. And I hope very much that, it's fake news that the incoming Trump team are trying to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I would like to bring this to Vlad and see, Vlad, if you have any thoughts on the matter.
Right. Great to be back on BTR, which is a lovely place and a home away from home. And great to be back talking to the very intelligent and very rational, very precise and very rigorous Mr. Jorjani.
Likewise, it's a pleasure. It's been too long, Vlad.
It's been too long. All that is great. All that is true. But a lot has happened, so let's continue fleshing out a few things that, some people may know, other people may not know. The Israelis, as they saw, had finished up basically 80% of their military operations against Hamas, one of the Ayatollahs. Many, actually, very numerous proxies in the region. After that, they moved on to Hezbollah, which was the bigger enemy and a much more complex problem, and a technically complex problem, and one of the most efficient and brutal and capable fighting forces in the entire Levant. Give them their due. They are very good at what they do, which is kill people. And the Hezbollah forces were a gun which was aimed at the head of the Israelis by the Ayatollahs. So a lot of the deterrent that the Ayatollahs had against Israel was Hezbollah really on their doorstep, being willing to send guys across the border, being able to send drones just an hour's flight or 30 minutes flight across the border, being able to fly in some of their, what was it, at a certain point, 100,000 rockets, some of them smart, some of them dumb rockets, ballistic, cruise, everything, right? So the Israelis very methodically destroyed the top of the Hezbollah pyramid in terms of their ruling elite, their political class, their Politburo, their leaders. Then they started assassinating the mid-tier ones, and I think they probably killed at this point about 30% of the membership of Hezbollah. And when you look at those flowcharts, I think like 36 or out of 37 out of the top 40 leaders of Hezbollah. Hezbollah on a political level is in disarray, and the new head of a political bureau of Hezbollah is making speeches calling on death to the Zionist entity from the safety of Tehran.
Yeah, it's a decapitated organization at this point.
It's a decapitated organization, and the Israelis spent about a year trying to get a deal going in order to get the Lebanese to back down. They were not able to do so, and after getting rid of the Hamas infrastructure and getting rid of Sinwar, they went in against Hezbollah. They decapitated the regime. They decapitated the organization, and now they're up for the main event. Right, the title card match is Israel against the Ayatollahs. The Ayatollahs can now no longer spread havoc by putting down 30,000 missiles into Tel Aviv and overwhelming Israeli air defense missile structures. Now, what I just said seems kind of obvious, but you have to sometimes just explain the obvious when setting up more complex arguments. Right? Having done that, the Israelis were waiting for the outcome of this election, the American election that just happened. We now know the outcome. Waiting to see what would happen with the Obama and Biden people in the State Department. Why is this important? For about a year and a half now, Obama-era people within the State Department, within the Biden administration, there's a lot of overlap in staffing, in the National Security Council, in the defense structure, in state, between the Obama administration and the Biden administration, right? And it was supposed to be those same people in the Harris administration, which would, from a foreign policy perspective, would have been a fourth Obama administration. So specifically, I'll give you three names who were very important in crafting the Obama era foreign policy towards the Ayatollahs. Amos Hochstein, very important figure. Blinken and Phil Gordon. These are three very important figures in the wider world of Obama national security advisors and appointees who were going to create a brave new world, and were going to realign American security architecture in the Middle East and slowly get the Americans out of the Middle East and create a security architecture where the Ayatollah's regime would have a big place for it in the Middle East, right? The Trump administration people obviously didn't want that. They said no to that. They swung back support to the Israelis and to our Arab allies, right? The Sunni bloc, away from the Shia resistance axis. This should be obvious to a lot of people, but it's not. A lot of my friends who vote for the Democratic Party, and by the way, I voted for Obama in 2012. So his foreign policy is something that I got as an Obama voter in 2012. A lot of my friends in the Democratic Party and liberal and progressive voters do not understand what the outcome of the Middle East chessboard was going to be under a Biden, Harris, Obama Democratic foreign policy.
Listen, you weren't alone. I confess, I also voted for Obama in 2020.
Really? I'm not the only one who wanted the Ayatollahs out?
As someone with tremendous background in understanding the geopolitics of the region and Iran in particular, I still voted for that bastard in 2012. Yeah.
So, okay, I don't feel as foolish on that. As a Ukrainian American, I also feel foolish because they, by they I mean the Obama administration, subaltered and sacrifice both the Syrian and the Ukrainian people to this demonic deal.
No, I'm sorry. I take it back. I was not that ignorant. I voted for, my apologies. I voted for him in the first election.
I was not a citizen
because I tell you, I was horrified at what he did in 2009 when the Iranian people rose up and they were literally chanting, Obama, Obama, you're either with them or with us.
Right.
And at that point, I just found Obama's actions unforgivable. So no, let me make a correction there. 2008 election.
You were a 2008 Obama voter. So again, there's a lot of context. There's a lot to understand. A lot has happened. This is a 2-year story. This is a 15-year story that we're.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, the Islamic Republic could have been overthrown in the summer of 2009 if the right decisions had been made. 2009,
the Obama administration went all in on something called the Obama administration was in some ways a repudiation of the neoconservatives ideals of Middle Eastern change. So when those winds of change blew through the Arab states, the Obama administration didn't quite know what to do. The so-called Arab Spring, they had mixed feelings about this, and they ultimately backed getting rid of Mubarak. They ultimately backed a lot of the uprisings. I won't call them liberal uprisings, but uprisings of Arab democratic forces all across the Levant, all of which turn out to be like a problem in retrospect for everybody. Because there's a reason why Americans have for 40 years been buying off the leaders of these Arab countries in order to protect us from the popolo of these states who don't like us as much. And when I say us, I mean Jews, Americans, Israelis, the West, Europe, blah, blah, blah. Right? So the Obama administration was ambivalent at best about the Arab Spring, but ultimately they backed the Arab Spring. What they did not back was the Iranian Spring, right?
Oh, well, look, the reason why why Obama and his policy-making clique backed the Arab uprisings and not the one in Iran is because sociologically, these are diametrically opposite phenomena. Mm-hmm. In the Arab countries, you had relatively secular, westernized elites being challenged by populist masses who intended to install Islamic theocracies.
Right.
Okay, because the democratization of the majority of the Arab world means the Islamization of the region.
We get rid of the army who controls these places.
Exactly.
And we bring in the representatives of the people who are less pleasant to us.
Yes, and I think that, this kind of policymaking around Obama goes back to Carter's ideas about the democratization of the Middle East. And let's not forget that Jimmy Carter was an evangelical Christian. And there's a certain affinity that he had, I think, for what he saw as, holy warriors and crusaders, namely jihadists for God, against the godless forces of, communism and whatever in the region. Okay, so there was a certain romance that Carter had with the downtrodden and oppressed of the region, which I think you very much saw continuity of in the Obama administration.
Obama, in his heart of hearts, really did really have an empathy for those people.
I think he did. And again, this is something I didn't realize about him when I voted for him in 2008. Certainly by 2012, I'd seen this. In any case, the Obama policymakers also understood that what was going on in Iran sociologically was the opposite, that you had a population who, even by 2009, and we'll get to where it's at by the present.
15 years later.
But yeah, 15 years later. But even by 2009, the majority of the Iranian people were fed up not just with this Islamic theocracy, but had en masse begun rejecting Islam as a religion. And so what you were about to see take place in Iran was a virulently secular anti-Islamic populist uprising. And for whatever reason, the Obama people did not want to see this materialize. And so instead, we had him sending letters to Ayatollah Khamenei.
As early as 2009, we now know.
During the uprising, he was sending letters to Ayatollah Khamenei. So look, this is setting up the situation in the sense that what a lot of people have to understand, and whenever I post in support of the Israeli operations, I get these people who reply to my tweets saying things like, well, if the Iranian people want to overthrow the Islamic Republic, they should do it themselves. Well, they've tried 4 times, okay?
It's one thing to not do anything to help or not help, but the Obama people actually put their hand on the scale.
Massively.
Massively. It was a very heavy hand. Lots of people in America and the West and don't understand that, but we actually prevented the overthrowing of the regime.
It was an active undermining of it, and despite that, the Iranian people poured out into the streets again in 2017 into 18. Mosques were set on fire. We talked about this last time we had a conversation. I want to be a broken record, but it got to the point where mosques were being set on fire in 2017 to 18. Then again, you had
the security forces fired on the people and killed like 1,500 protesters.
It was bad. 2017 into 2018.
Terrible.
Then it was even worse in 2022 to 23. The uprising after the death of Mahsa Amini, that was the closest I think probably we've gotten so far to an overthrow of the regime. So if you take this all the way back to 1999, a decade before the 2009 uprising, the first major protests against this regime were actually in 1999 during Khatami. And the Iranian people were thinking that President Khatami was potentially an Iranian Gorbachev who could collapse the regime from within.
Right.
Okay. So if you look at this trend, 1999, 2009, 2017, 2018, and then 2022 to 23, the protests are becoming more frequent and more intense. And this is a sign
and more violent against the Basiji and the security forces of the IRGC.
Exactly. And I think the reason for the escalation and violent intensification in violence, again, is sociological. It's that if you look at the demographics of Iran today, mosque attendance is down to 5%.
Ooh.
5%.
Love to see it.
Okay. So that makes Iran the least religious of the major countries in the world. A country that nominally...
Certainly Middle East.
Show me what country has church attendance that's at 5% in Europe.
The Czech Republic.
Okay.
They don't go to church.
I said major countries. I love Prague. but Czech Republic is...
You got to check your privilege.
Czech Republic is hardly a geopolitical power, right? So in Iran...
Argentinians don't go to church.
And by the way, this is something important to point out to listeners, which might not have a sense of scope and scale here.
Right.
Iran is a country 3 times the size of France. It has a population of over 80 million people.
I thought it was 75, but it's 80 now?
No, it's over 80 million people.
Is that right?
It's over 80. And
so it's a very young country. The population's young.
Yeah, very young country in terms of the age of the median population. Yeah. Not a young country in terms of the...
No. I mean, in terms of the age demographic, most of the
something like 75% of the Iranian population, 70% is under the age of 30.
Right.
Which makes it, yes, one of the youngest countries in the world.
Right.
And I think there's a correlation to the fact that there's 5% mosque attendance, okay? So the virulence of these demonstrations and the intensity of the violence in them is definitely related to the fact that people have rejected Islam as a social phenomenon and not just this theocracy.
Right. So that's where we are, to continue on to the narrative, the story we're telling. By 2010, by 2009, you have the Green Revolution, right? And the Obama people do not back it. In fact, they want to make a deal with the Ayatollahs in order to get the Americans out of the Middle East. Obama comes to power as a repudiation of the American stupidity in the Middle East of the previous 8 years. And he takes this seriously, his mandate, for whatever third worldist reasons or anti-imperialist reasons or anti-colonialist reasons or personal reasons or geopolitical reasons. I'm not in his head, and obviously he's an incredibly complex and very closed-off person. I don't actually know what he's thinking. But for whatever reason, Obama wants a deal with the Ayatollahs and the regime in order to draw down American presence in the Middle East. In order to do that, he has to reconstitute the entire security architecture of the Middle East, because the Middle East is not an unimportant place. Like, New Zealand's not an important place geopolitically in terms of trade, in terms of oil, or the south of Argentina is not an important place. The Middle East is an incredibly important place. 80% of the world's trade goes around either the Gulf or through the straits around the Gulf, or through the Sinai, or through the
Yeah, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is the most significant economic chokehold point of the world.
Right. And now the Americans don't need oil and gas anymore because America is now oil and gas self-sufficient, but the rest of the world still does. Right. And you can't collapse the oil market, even if America is completely self-sufficient, without collapsing the world's economy, right? So these are basic things, but you just can't. You can't, if you're the world's global superpower whose job is to patrol the sea waves and to keep the global economy from collapsing, just leave the Middle East without leaving some sort of security architecture in place.
I have a quick question for both of you guys in relation to this.
Yeah.
Knowing that precarious state of the Middle East, why would the Obama administration want to help the Islamic Republic of Iran out? Is it some kind of a better safe than sorry thing, or does it have to do with something much more nefarious?
You want to venture?
It's a great question,
because I have something in mind.
You have a couple of answers. I see it in your eyes, but
you're right. You're absolutely right.
I could read your
two precisely.
I see. You have two answers. I'm gonna give you different ones than the ones I think you're gonna give. First of all, I just think he wanted out of the Middle East. That's the obvious answer. He wanted Americans to come home quietly without the Vietnam-style blowback to America losing the war in Vietnam. By he, I mean Obama cannily understood that America went through some really bad stuff because of the way that America left Vietnam. He didn't want to repeat that on his watch. So he's thinking, we're not going to have that kind of thing again. We're going to leave quietly. We're going to do this very discreetly, right? And so he thought that he could set up a new security architecture and make parity between the Sunni and the Shia bloc, and that Americans can go home quietly. If you can screw over the annoying Israelis, all to the better. There you go. I think that to me is the more obvious answer. But what are your two answers, good sir?
Well, what you said about Vietnam is also relevant to what I was going to say, which is that if you look at the region geostrategically, and you have some sense of the depth of history here, okay, and the civilizational development of the region, you understand that Iran is the fulcrum of that region and has been for 2,500 years at least, okay? As we were pulling out of Vietnam, President Nixon wanted a similar disengagement from the Middle East. And his solution, having the good advisors that he had around him at that time, his solution, and this was partly also, Henry Kissinger's strategizing, was to put Iran in charge of the region. Now, of course, we had the Shah back in those days, who was a close ally of the United States, and by the way, a personal friend of President Nixon.
Reasonable, better than the Turks, better than the Arabs. At that point, a reasonable answer.
Absolutely. And so Nixon's answer was, as we withdraw from the region, we will, basically allow Iran to be the policeman of, the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. So one answer to why the Obama administration did this is that based on geostrategic understanding alone and essentially comprehending what the center of gravity of civilization is in that region, you realize that Iran is best positioned to guarantee security. Now, of course, the huge disanalogy here is that in Nixon's time, it was the Pahlavi regime that was in charge.
Well, good.
And now,
by the standards of Washington, D.C., they're good.
Right.
Yeah. They're secular. They're like.
Yeah, now it's a barbaric Islamic theocracy. Right. Which brings me to the second reason why I think Obama did this, is going back to what I was saying about the Arab Spring.
Yes.
I think that Barack Obama and the people he picked to surround him have a deep ideological sympathy with this discourse of the downtrodden and oppressed of the world.
Third worldism.
Yeah, third worldism. This is what it is. They have this.
Mondialism.
This is third worldism, which also was behind Obama's decision to attempt to back the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Right. Okay. And so they justified it with this geostrategic analysis.
But it was emotional at heart.
But really, it was emotional at heart. And they wanted the Ayatollahs not only to become a power capable of force projection in the region. I don't think it's even parity with the Sunnis. I think they wanted an Islamic Republic capable of force projection. And I would say one huge piece of evidence in favor of that is that if you remember back to that time during the Obama administration, there were conversations on CNN where Fareed Zakaria, and he was taking out editorials, Fareed Zakaria, in Newsweek and various magazines, arguing that the Ayatollahs should have nuclear weapons and that the world is not going to end if the Islamic Republic has nuclear weapons. Now, I'm
going to remind him of this. Next time I see him at the Yes conference in Kiev, I'm going to remind him of this.
I think I still have the magazine somewhere. I'm telling you.
Please send me that.
Yeah. So, look, if the Obama administration was tacitly willing to allow Iran to be a nuclear-armed state, rather the Islamic Republic to be a nuclear-armed state, then it suggests that they were interested in handing essentially the security of the entire Persian Gulf region over to the Ayatollahs.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy.
To me, that's mental. That's like Nurse Ratched
It is
mental.
Now let me just put a pin in this for a minute. Let me just make a side note here. It's not a side, it's a very important qualification. I'm entirely in favor of Iran having nuclear weapons. In fact, I think it's long overdue.
You're a Persian nationalist.
In Iran, well, look, I'm not actually a nationalist, but I'm very much for a strong Iran.
Okay.
I'm very much for a strong Iran.
Respect.
So I'm entirely in favor of Iran having nuclear weapons. Iran almost had nuclear weapons in 1975-76 under Nixon going into Ford. And why that didn't materialize is a long conversation. Iran reached the nuclear threshold again precisely under the Obama administration. Around 2010 or so is when this regime developed the capacity to build nuclear weapons.
We're going to return to that in a bit.
Right?
Breakout zone.
So there's two questions here, okay? A nuclear Iran versus nuclear weapons in the hands of the Ayatollahs.
Right.
The latter is a serious problem.
Right. Clearly, obviously. But it's not obvious to anyone working in the Obama or Biden State Department, but it's obvious to anyone who's not crazy.
Well, this brings us to Mr. Stephen Coughlin, who I eventually want to get on the show. He was formerly in the United States Central Command, and he wrote this book called Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad. And it goes on to say over here that after the events of September 11th, Stephen Coughlin was mobilized from his private sector to the intelligence directorate at the Joint Chiefs of Staff to work in targeting. Thus begun his education in terrorism in the years that followed. He earned recognition as the Pentagon's leading expert on Islamic-based doctrines motivating jihadi groups that confront America. So here's the main part. Okay. This was more than our enemies, and it seems our leaders could tolerate. Beginning in 2011, the Muslim Brotherhood convinced the White House to ban Coughlin and put an end to his briefings. The move was in keeping with Sharia concepts of slander that seek to blindfold America to certain realities that render us defenseless against a threat made existential by the very ignorance it gets our leaders to enforce.
Well, I mean,
yes.
Look, it's obviously true.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we didn't need that entire book promotion to drive the point home that if you want to geostrategically confront Islam, you need to understand Islam.
Islamism, yeah. Islam. Yeah.
No. Listen, I will stick my neck out and say the enemy is Islam. I've always said this. I will say it consistently. I'll say it until they cut my goddamn head off. All you need to do is read the Quran competently once, and you understand that.
I don't want to go there because I don't want to.
You don't have to say anything. Don't worry.
I'm a member of the establishment in good standing.
You're not responsible for anything I say. Look, read the Quran once competently, preferably in a few different translations. Okay, and you'll see that in the Islamic worldview, the entire planet is divided into only two spheres.
Dar al-Islam
and Dar al-Harb.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Dar al-Islam means, Islam, by the way, means submission. This is what the word means.
Peace also.
It means having been put into a position of submission. It means peace in that sense.
Yeah, then you'll be at peace.
That's right. Peace, like the way a gun is called a peacemaker, right? So Dar al-Islam means the subjugated world. It means the world that has been brought into submission. And Dar al-Harb means war. Dar al-Harb means where we're still at war in order to bring about submission. And the submission can be forced conversion to Islam, or it can be attacks on other peoples of the book to essentially turn them into dhimmis or a colonized population.
The jizya.
Yes, and if you look at the history of how Islam expanded, it expanded by, in some cases, physical genocide, and in every other case, at least cultural genocide.
Okay, before we go into Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens territory, I just want to say, as a Jew from the Muslim world, I was born in Central Asia. As a Jew from the Central Asian republics, as a Jew from the Muslim world, I'm going to very quickly defend the counter argument that it's how we read the books, and the Bible and the Old Testament also has a lot of crazy shit in it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I think our added value is to talk about geopolitics and not.
No, but look, I'm responding to what Lev is quoting here, because look, here's the issue, is that there's a drastic disanalogy here between the Bible and the Quran, in that the Old Testament was written by tens of different authors over the course of hundreds of years, and we don't even have a really good understanding of when it was canonized in its current form. Okay, that the Tanakh was composed by tens of different authors over the course of hundreds of years. It's an incredibly polyvalent text. We don't even understand well how it was canonized in what periods, okay? The Quran is the work of one man who was not only a prophet, he was a statesman in his own lifetime.
And a warlord.
Okay? So the Quran is more like Mao's Little Red Book. It's an ideological tractate by a person who wasn't just a religious leader, he was a military
commander
and a head of state during his own lifetime. Okay, so these are completely disanalogous. So when you have like it's a large, I don't want to make up a number, it's a large percentage of the Quran, something like, I don't know, 20%, something like that, consisting of legal injunctions.
Sure.
There is a body of law implicit to that text, all of which is put under the proviso, which is repeated several times in the Quran, that nothing in this book can ever be changed.
Yeah,
nothing in this book can ever be changed.
It's harder to do interpretation of a text with the Quran than it is with the Old Testament.
Right.
This is true.
So speaking
this is what they taught us in comparative religion class in college.
Well, they should have taught you. This is how I used to, by the way, I used to teach comparative religion.
Right.
And I almost got thrown out of one of the universities I taught at for teaching precisely this.
Okay.
In any case, to speak more specifically to your point, Lev, if we had competent military commanders and policymakers in Washington, they would at least understand this about the Quran and about the fundamental characteristics of Islam as a religion and an ideology. Okay? So all of which is by way of saying obviously.
Yes.
Right?
But the thing for me about this in particular, what's more concerning even than that, is that this guy, Stephen Coughlin, who has this very important position in analyzing all this stuff, he was fired. He was let go. And from what I read in the book, all the references to Islam in connection with terrorism were scrapped afterwards. So what exactly was going on here? Does it have any connection to the Obama administration's lenience towards the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Of course it.
Yes.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And look,
He likes setting up like obvious.
Again, Islam, and look, the Iranian people at this point are very familiar with this, especially the youth, that Islam was a terrorist apparatus from the start. When the Arabs crossed the Zagros Mountains and entered central Iran in, let's say, the early 800s, okay, late 700s, early 800s, they would go hide out in the deserts and then carry out night raids on populated areas.
Well, they were tribesmen. I mean, they were tribal raiders.
Well, yeah, and this is why, actually, it's one of the reasons why the national military of Iran, the military of the Sassanid Empire, was defeated by these Arabs, because they didn't understand these kinds of asymmetrical warfare tactics. In other words, they were not used to fighting terrorists.
One man's terrorist, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, except that there's no freedom involved in what Islam brought even to the peninsula, let alone what it did to the civilized people surrounding it in the Persian Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire.
I understand that you are saying that this is very common knowledge and why even bring it up. But when we really think about what we're saying here, what we're saying is that there is a fifth column element deep within the United States government. And that brings us to the situation today with Donald Trump when it comes to Iran.
We're not quite there. We skipped about 8 years of history. We're going to keep going. We're not quite there to Donald Trump.
But that's a teaser. That's a little teaser for the audience to see where we're going.
We're definitely going to get there.
We're definitely going to get there.
We're up to 2012.
Well, you have something in mind in terms of this 8-year gap that brings us up to the present. Why don't you flesh that out?
Okay, so the negotiations between you really have to understand the JCPOA, which is the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known popularly as the Iran deal. Right? Everyone knows the Iran deal, the JCPOA, the jewel of the Obama foreign policy crown. This is something that they'd been working on for 3, 4, 5, even 6 years.
An utter disaster.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we're prescriptive as opposed. Well, yeah, it's an utter disaster. Of course, it's an utter disaster. But we're analysts, so we're being prescriptive before we become descriptive. Actually, the other way around. We're being descriptive before we become prescriptive. So, the JCPOA is the Obama administration's deal that they are negotiating in 2011, 2012, and crucially 2013. What happens in 2013 is obviously the Syrian Civil War is ongoing. And the Russians are about to come in a year and a half. And also there are negotiations with the Iranians, with the only people they really respect and fear and will trust as an interlocutor on the nuclear power stuff, which is Moscow. And at the same time, you have, in my own beloved Ukraine, starting in November, you have the Maidan Revolution of Dignity against a Russian proxy regime. It's a bit more complicated than that, but basically it's like that. And the Obama administration has to make a decision in terms of what they want. Do they want to continue down this track that they began 4 years ago in 2009 during the Green Revolution, ignoring these nice secular liberal women who are rising up against the Ayatollahs and the Basiji policemen who are beating them for not covering their hair? Or are they going to continue on with their isolationism and their third worldism and their chosen path of making a deal with this rancid regime and getting Americans out of the Middle East as they want to? They have to, in the process, if they take that route, sacrifice the pawns, which is the Syrian liberal democratic opposition, and the Ukrainians who are trying to get rid of Russian influence. What they decide to do, very obviously, is to pick the track of bringing America out of the Middle East. So they make a deal with the Russians. They need Russian heavy lift, as certain people who I in my social circle refer to diplomatically. They take the Russian heavy lift diplomatically to be interlocutors with the Ayatollahs. In the process, they screw over the Syrian democratic opposition and us in Ukraine. I've had at least 3 Ukrainian generals tell me off the record, almost spitting with rage. The Obama people told me in 2014 not to fight hard, right? So what happens in March of 2014 is very important. At the same time as the Syrian opposition starts losing the civil war to Assad and his Ayatollah IRGC proxy forces, including Hezbollah, who are terrible people, right? At the same time, the Russians annex Crimea, and the State Department under Obama does nothing. They do not. They barely sanction the Russians, and they let the Assad and Hezbollah and Ayatollah combined forces take over, right? And they also tacitly allow the Russian Air Force to come in and take territory in the Levant, thus putting the Russian Air Force and Russian army on the border of multiple American Arab allies and on the border of Israel, right? Importantly. What happens then is that the Russians and the Ukrainians fight a small war to a standstill, And by early 2015, you have the first Minsk Accord, and then you have the Russians intervening with the Russian Air Force, barrel bombing Aleppo, killing all those rebels, and also taking bases in the Middle East, with the Americans withdrawing. And continue on, sir.
Continue on in terms of the Ukrainian theater.
No, well, the Ukrainian theater, obviously they set the war for the full-scale invasion to come. But the Ayatollahs blitz through the Middle East. They take over 4 Arab capitals.
Yeah, well, an important element here was General Qasem Soleimani.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of amounts. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you're talking about the Russian air power being deployed in the region.
And the expeditionary forces of the IRGC.
Yes, the expeditionary forces of the IRGC, led by this
charismatic and hyper-competent general.
Essentially Islamic Napoleon of the Ayatollah's regime. And, Donald Trump's decision to take him out is one significant factor in setting up the situation as it confronts us today.
Okay.
Because I think that there was a certain hierarchical structure within the Islamic Republic that was destabilized by the elimination of Soleimani.
Mm-hmm.
And that both increased chaos and unpredictability in the region due to the incoherence of the regime's own policies, and also opened up the potential for an inner power struggle in the Islamic Republic.
Right. There was no hyper competent, charismatic Napoleon who's running with extreme skill 3 Arab countries at once and their proxies.
Let me put it to you this way: the only man who could possibly have saved the Islamic Republic as Iran's form of government in the longer run was Qasem Soleimani. If we're looking at the current domestic political situation in Iran, if this regime, not if, when this regime starts to go into a collapse.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Well, be'omid khoda. It has nothing to do with Allah. Allah is on the side of the Ayatollahs. Be'omid khoda.
I joke.
Mithra willing.
I kid. Take my wife, please.
Mithra willing. When this regime begins to collapse, the only person who had the clout and the standing.
And the skill.
Yes, to be able to step in for Ayatollah Khamenei, whether he died of natural causes or was assassinated or whatever Israel hopefully plans to do with him, The only person who could have filled that vacuum and held this regime up was Qasem Soleimani. Their plan right now, in the case that hopefully Khamenei is eliminated the way that Nasrallah was eliminated, their plan now is to replace him with his son, Mojtaba Khamenei.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the most wildly unpopular decision that you could ever imagine. I mean, that's putting it lightly, right?
Even amongst Islamic regime clerics?
Yes, because they see it as corruption. Look, the discourse of this regime was to replace...
Bannon Trump in power.
Well, think back to 1979. The discourse of this regime was that the hereditary monarchy was corrupt and that they were going to create a republic based on Islamic values. Now here we have essentially a theocratic monarchy,
right,
where Khamenei's son succeeds him. Right? I mean, this is a farce even to some of the more...
Even a farce to the Farsi.
It's a farce to the Pharisees of the regime.
Right.
Okay? And it's not going to fly. So the elimination of Soleimani was a very interesting strategic move because it took out the one man who could have been a kind of Napoleonic solution to the continuation of the Islamic Republic.
Right. So that was Trump's great... unpredictable stroke of genius. Trump is obviously completely unpredictable. He campaigns as a peacenik, then he wants to be an isolationist, then he kills the Napoleon of the other side. He scrambles policy.
Well, it's almost like he's not even there. It's almost like he's not a man as much as an antenna to, have various signals at certain times go in his brain in order to change history. But, that's...
I mean, like, if Hegel's man on horseback is Trump, as many pundits in the Financial Times have written, that man eliminates the other man on horseback, who is Soleimani. Where are we?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't like to give either of them so much dignity, frankly.
Yeah, whatever.
But be that as it may, where we are is that there is a power vacuum in the Islamic Republic. Mm-hmm. There really is no one who can replace Ayatollah Khamenei and be effective, decisive, and govern that regime in a coherent fashion. There are many power mafias inside this regime.
Right.
Ones that represent economic interests, ones that are paramilitary. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, we've talked about this before, is essentially an economic institution as much as a military one right now.
The last time I was in Tehran, the price of a bottle of whiskey was about the same as it was in Istanbul. And I was drinking a bottle of the finest whiskey in a lovely north Tehran home with actually the daughter of an Ayatollah. And I was like, "Where'd you get this whiskey?" And she's like, "I know a guy in the RGC."
Well, yeah, sure.
And and the whiskey was not that much more expensive. It was like 5-10% more expensive than it would have been in a liquor store in Paris or London or New York, which means that the profit margin on importing liquor isn't what it should be in a country that's supposed to be completely dry.
The profit margin.
Yeah. The profit margin, thank you very much.
Yes, they pour concrete, they run banks, they're in every kind of business. Yeah. And so you have a proliferation of mafias in Iran. If Khamenei goes, I don't think his son will be accepted even by... Look, there was a recent report that one of the high-level intelligence operatives of the Islamic Republic basically made an assessment that Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, being put in place as his successor, is something that would be rejected as a sign of gross corruption, even by, relatively loyal elements of the...
Even clerics within the regime.
Yes. And so I think they'll turn on each other like a bunch of rats in a sinking ship.
One can only hope.
They will. And so this is why I think it's incredibly important that the Israelis be allowed to finish the job. I'm very concerned that, the Trump team is looking to negotiate with the Ayatollahs even before they've come into office in Washington.
Before we get to the negotiation and the potential thereof, when it comes to Iran and the United States, there have been reports of Hezbollah working in Venezuela when it comes to mining gold
100%.
And when it comes to working with the drug cartels.
Yes.
And given our current situation in the border and the question of, well, why are these borders so open up, as well as, Russia's relationship here as well when it comes to their Mexican embassy being staffed with way more people than their embassy in Brazil, there seems to be all kinds of things related to the border situation as well that Iran is making use of. And that also brings to mind China and how much of a role China is playing in this. So before we talk about the deals that are potentially going to be made here, or what exactly are the ramifications of the Trump presidency, what exactly do you guys make of what's been going on this whole time in relation to China, in relation to the border situation when it comes to Iran?
You want me to respond first?
Yeah, no, you do that, yeah.
Okay. Look, if what you're implying is that there are Hezbollah assets within the United States, unfortunately, the answer is yes. Probably thousands of them.
Are you talking about professors at Columbia University?
No.
Okay.
That's a whole other set.
I'll be here all week.
Those are Hezbollah propagandists. But I'm talking about people who would be capable of engaging in operations in the context of, let's say, an American ground war with Iran. With the Islamic Republic, I should say. Always important to emphasize this distinction. But here's the thing. Look, I don't know if this is what you were trying to imply, but let's just say it is, right? That Trump wants to secure the border for the same reason he doesn't want a war with Iran, namely that he's interested in protecting the American people. And if you know that there are thousands of Hezbollah operatives inside the United States, the last thing you want is a ground war with the Islamic Republic before you've dealt with that border security issue. I understand that. But no one's calling for an American ground invasion of Iran. We discussed this last time. We had a conversation.
That's crazy.
It's preposterous.
We're both hawkish guys, but that's like, it's not going to be Americans, and it shouldn't be Americans.
Well, it's utterly unnecessary because the ground force are the Iranian people themselves.
100%.
And I don't think an American air campaign is necessary either. In no way is an American war with Iran necessary. Israel's air campaign alone can create the conditions for the Iranian people to topple.
And it's already started. They've taken out 4 out of the 5 air defense systems around Tehran.
Not just around Tehran, throughout the country.
Well, there's one left on the Tajik border because it's just too far away to be useful.
Right. Well, the S-300s and the S-400s, billions and billions of dollars of hardware were decimated by Israel in that last operation.
That's right.
So Iran is basically left without air defense. Now, time is of the essence here because the Israelis have to carry out another major air operation while the air defense systems are still down. The point is, in answering your question, it's not a realistic scenario to imagine that the United States is going to be drawn into some ground campaign in Iran, and then the Ayatollahs are going to activate these Hezbollah agents inside the United States. That's fanciful, okay? I think it's a fear in the back of the minds of a lot of people who want Trump to negotiate with this regime. They don't understand the degree of popular opposition to the regime. By the regime's own estimates, something like only 16% of the population still supports the Islamic Republic as Iran's
hardcore supports, not actually is willing to fight for the regime.
Yes, 16%. Willing to fight for the regime, it's a lot less than that. The vast majority of Iranians are at a point where if the regime is crippled, if, key regime officials are taken out the way that Hezbollah's command structure was taken out.
That's quite easy for the Israelis with their, by the way, do you know how it's so obvious that the entire infrastructure of communication of the Ayatollahs and the RGC is completely compromised? If Israelis could do that to Hezbollah, why wouldn't they be able to do that in a country where they have a lot more friendly people on the ground?
Yeah.
There are a lot more agents of Israel in Tehran than there were in Lebanon and Beirut, far more.
It's created a tremendous sense of paranoia inside the regime 100%. Because they've become aware of it recently.
Why wouldn't they be?
And every time someone proposes a hawkish policy in Tehran, people look at him sideways, is he actually an agent of Israel, a provocateur who's trying to get us to misstep? And it's causing them to doubt themselves, to hesitate, and be in a state of...
They don't know who to trust. They don't know how to have a meeting without the Israelis listening in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So look,
Decreases efficiency.
Yes, Israel is positioned to finish this job. And I think that going back to what we were saying toward the beginning of this conversation, Netanyahu's latest statement to the Iranian people is a regime change speech. I mean, it's very clear. And fortunately, we have an opposition that can easily fill the vacuum of power, okay?
Is it really easy? Because the counter argument, and you see in all the newspapers, we don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be like Iraq again.
Let me say this. I have been a very staunch, harsh, long-term critic of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi for a variety of reasons, okay? I'm not going to repeat those criticisms. They're on record. I won't belabor repeating them right now because I don't want to undermine what frankly is a cohesive alternative, at least for a transition out of the Islamic Republic.
You personally would support...
At this point, it's necessary, I think, to support Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi as a transitional leader who can organize free and fair elections.
And a constitutional convention.
Yes, and a constitutional convention. For better or for worse, this is the person who has the most name recognition in Iran. And, the legacy of his family is...
the legacy of 2,500 years of self-rule by Iranians.
Well, at least the Pahlavi dynasty did claim that heritage as its own and, was proud to embrace the Persian heritage, right, as a point of pride for the policies that they were crafting for Iran's future. So, look, the Pahlavi regime is looked back on fondly, and Crown Prince Reza, for whatever faults he may have, has the broadest name recognition by far of anyone in the Iranian opposition. And I think that there's a lot of planning that's taken place. And I was privy to some of the efforts to get that going back when I was working with people in the Iranian opposition. Again, there were strategies that I preferred. Okay, we looked at coup options and various things like that. Which, had they materialized, I think would have been preferable. The plan that's been decided on is to basically invite as many elements of this regime as possible to defect and to minimize immediate prosecutions to those who've been really responsible for, decision-making regarding execution of political prisoners and, promoting terrorism and supporting proxy forces, so that as many people from within the bureaucracy as possible
will come into
the new administration, and there will be stability in all domains of governance.
That's what's reasonable.
Yeah, it's reasonable, at least insofar as we need to be able to organize free and fair elections and a constitutional convention to decide what form of regime is going to replace the Islamic Republic. I'm not necessarily in favor of restoring the Pahlavi dynasty, but certainly whatever replaces this cursed theocracy
would be better.
Is going to be a secular regime aligned, let's say, with the West.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we have a guy who's now stepped forward to take the responsibility to organize that transition. So there's not going to be a vacuum of power.
First of all, my question related to the migration has to do not with secret Hezbollah operatives, but it has more to do with weaponized migration when it comes to what Russia's, for example, been doing to places like Finland, bring the African migrants in there. So the fact that you have so many of these migrants coming from Venezuela specifically makes me think that this is something that would have been in Iran's favor to bring as many people into the United States in order to destabilize things over here for a lot of the reasons that you were talking about.
Just one thing, though, about that, like the point I was making is that, and again, very unfortunately, a lot of those people coming from Venezuela aren't Venezuelans. By the way, they're not Iranians either. They're Arab Shia recruits who pass for Venezuelans and who've infiltrated the United States.
Arab Shia? Like from where?
Yemen, Syria, Lebanon.
So when it comes to what Israel is able to do here, since you were talking about there being these recent magnitude tremors in Iran, that leads us to believe that they've done nuclear tests already, and how much Israel can actually do here as far as military strikes now, considering that Iran is in the big boys table all of a sudden.
Right.
Now that the Trump administration has won, now that the air defense systems of the regime are gone, now that their proxies in Hezbollah are destroyed, now that their guys in Syria are disoriented, now that they are on the cusp of losing everything, why wouldn't they, with 10 weeks to go before a new Trump administration, put the button on and try to break out into a nuclear weapon, or at least one of them? Why not?
This goes back to what you were saying about the JCPOA. So it's a good way to connect back to, your remarks on the Obama-Iran nuclear deal, which was a farce.
A Farsi farce.
So, by the way, just so you, since you've made that joke for the second time, let me just make a note of the fact that
Take a joke.
to the American audience, never call the Persian language Farsi.
I know.
Ever.
I know.
So I don't want to get into the politics of this, but this is like a left-wing plot to change the name of the Persian language in English to Farsi because it's connected to this third worldism and Arabism, and they want to make it seem as if Persian is some dialect of Arabic and some bullshit. Countries have exonyms and endonyms for their languages. Like, no one says français when they're speaking English about the French language. No one says Deutsch when they're speaking in English about the German language.
No one says Ukrainsky when they say Ukrainian.
Languages have well-established names for themselves in the languages of other peoples.
Right.
And in the English language going back hundreds and hundreds of years,
It's Persian.
It's Persian. Okay, end of story. So please, the Persian language. Anyway.
Okay.
And this is not like a very, very minor thing either, because it's connected to the question of secessionism and separatism, and which we can get into. But to go to the nuclear question, the reason why the JCPOA was such a farce is because while Obama was using it to funnel all this money to the mullahs,
we forgot to talk about that.
Oh yeah, billions. He sent billions of dollars,
$100 billion.
Yes,
which they then used to kill a bunch of Arabs.
Absolutely,
and to give money to the Hezbollah and Hamas and the Syrian opposition
and
guys.
Biden continued those policies.
Correct. Okay, so yeah, we forgot that very important part of the puzzle.
Right. The reason it was a farce, though, is because if anyone with half a brain was designing the JCPOA, they ought to have known that Iran does not use its gas centrifuges for its nuclear weapons program. Iran uses laser isotope enrichment. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about a country, I'm talking about for its nuclear weapons program. If you look at the history of countries that have secretly developed nuclear weapons, from Israel to Pakistan to others.
North Korea.
Japan.
They don't have a nuke.
Yes, they do. And okay. so we'll get to this, okay?
If you insist.
So if you look at the history of countries secretly developing nuclear weapons programs, the key is to have a parallel track to civilian nuclear energy infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And what you do is you create a ruse where you make it seem as if you're diverting fissile material from a civilian nuclear energy program into a weapons program. But actually, you have a completely parallel track weapons program that's unconnected to the energy program, and you use other technologies for that. And this is the route that the Iranians went. And we're talking about a country that consists 70% of mountains, okay, and where deep underground bunkers and tunnel systems can be built and have been built. And then, there's a number of things over the years which, look, these analysts should have been aware of. I've been aware of them with the limited connections that I've had. Like, for example, a number of Soviet warheads went missing in 1992, 93. And from what I heard at the time, Iran purchased 5 of these. It disassembled 2 of them to study how to create an explosive shell around a plutonium or uranium core, and it disassembled another one to understand warhead design. And it kept 3 in the refrigerator.
Okay.
Now, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad gave a speech not all that long ago, I think maybe it was a couple years ago, where he said, back when I was president around 2010, we developed the capability to domestically produce nukes and start rolling them off the assembly line. 2010. Okay?
Is that you think it's legitimate?
He was the president of the country. And his gripe was, he was saying, I was telling them we should really, get going with this. Point being, every technical element of the project was already in place in 2010 to start rolling nukes off the assembly line.
We know for a fact that Tehran is the arguments between the analysts is whether they're 8 weeks away from a bomb or 12 weeks away from a bomb if they start on the breakout.
Another thing that should really be an alarm bell for you is that the Israelis have been saying this about the Iranian nuclear weapons program for decades.
Right.
Now, I also heard when I was in the Iranian opposition working at a very high level, and when I say that, I mean we were a group, a nominally cultural group, which because of our cultural status, were able to bring together the 3 most prominent nationalist parties: the National Front, Mohammad Mossadegh's party, the Constitutionalist Party, Constitutional Monarchist Party, which is like dating back to the Constitutional Revolution, the turn of the century, 1906 to 1911. So that's a very well-established monarchist party. And then the Pan-Iranist Party. So we brought these 2 nationalist monarchist parties together with Mossadegh's Republican Party. Imagine. Okay? So I was operating at that level, and so I was able to hear various things from, people involved with agencies, okay, including people who worked, as CIA contractors and so forth. And one of the disturbing things I heard around 2018 was that the Ayatollahs had paid the North Koreans to bring 6 warheads into Iran, with the North Koreans justifying this as an insurance policy for themselves. Right? So the North Koreans essentially took money from the Ayatollahs to pre-position 6 North Korean nukes inside of Iran. And the North Koreans are saying to themselves, okay, we'll do this because it's an insurance policy in case something happens. Some of our nukes are located outside of the country, and we have the Iranians as a second strike.
No serious person thinks that they don't have a technology if they're not in the breakout space.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you put all of these pieces together,
what do you get?
And then you look at what happened on October 5th and what happened on November 3rd.
Right.
It looks like Iran already has nuclear weapons. So October 5th, there was a seismic signature, which is one that's only and always associated with a nuclear detonation rather than an earthquake.
Deep underground.
Yeah, well, it's a signature where you get a huge spike and then only smaller ones afterwards. In other words, something like an earthquake with no aftershocks at all. And I confess, I studied nuclear weapons for a while, many, many years ago. It was a kind of side hobby of mine. And this is something that I remember very clearly, is that this is an unmistakable signature of a nuclear test. So we saw that on October 5th. And immediately after that, interestingly enough, a then imminent Israeli strike was significantly delayed. Then on November 3rd, we had another incident, interestingly in exactly the same region, which, guess what, is a weapons testing range. It is a known...
Where, Hormuz, or where is this?
No, Semnan province.
Okay.
It's out in the direction of the desert away from Tehran, but not all that far away from Tehran. It's a known weapons testing range. In the second incident on November 3rd, there was a very intense thermal signature detected. at the time of this earthquake. So I think it's very reasonable to suspect that Iran has potentially tested 2 nukes successfully at this point.
And if that's the case, then what?
My argument is that the Soviet Union was also brought down, being, the world's predominant nuclear power at the time.
Sure.
Simply the fact that a regime may have at this point half a dozen nukes says nothing about whether it can survive sociopolitically.
Do they have the ballistic technology to deliver one of those nukes to an Arab capital or to Tel Aviv?
They have no delivery system.
That's what I'm asking.
They have no delivery
system. They do not have a proper SS-21 ballistic system to...
They would need to put it on an oil tanker or something and come into a harbor and...
That's okay. Well, that's not a quick response system, right?
Now let me say what I think is the most serious thing here.
Okay.
All right, is that if, as I think, you agree that the fact that Iran may have half a dozen nukes should not be a deterrent to trying to collapse this regime, including in ways that we collapsed the Soviet Union, right? There were all kinds of things done in terms of working with opposition groups and working with certain segments of society to collapse the Soviet Union, despite it's having a larger nuclear arsenal than the United States, right?
Yeah, but they had full spectrum delivery capacity, full spectrum. They could hit any place in the world
exactly.
at any given
It was a much worse situation, is my point.
And yet, 50 zillion.
And yet it didn't stop us from essentially a regime change policy.
Under Reagan.
Yeah, exactly, under Reagan, yeah.
But if it is the facts and the analysis that we have in open source is wrong, that the Iranians, the Persians, Iran, the Ayatollahs, whatever you want to call the regime, do not yet have a missile, which is the conventional story, then what you're saying is a very different situation.
Right. So point being, there's even less reason to hesitate in carrying through this regime change policy.
Like the game theory of it is completely different.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, here's the one concern I do have. Policymakers ought to take this question very seriously. If Iran has half a dozen nukes, what happens to those weapons when the regime collapses or as it's collapsing? We have to...
They get sold to the...
Well, this is the thing, is that, look, mark my words, one thing that's going to happen as this regime collapses is that you're going to have an exodus of certain IRGC elites comparable to the Nazi escape to Latin America. You're going to have certain people in the Sepah who flee to Yemen, Syria, Lebanon.
Parts of Iraq.
Large parts of Iraq, probably predominantly Iraq. And the nightmare scenario is that they take these nukes with them and they use them as leverage. Okay?
Is that a reason for us to not collapse the regime?
No, it's a reason for us to design a policy that takes into consideration the security of a potential very small nuclear arsenal that Iran may have. Something that I don't want to see happen, and one of the reasons I have expressed a lot of reservations about Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, is that the man looks up to the likes of Nelson Mandela and Gandhi and so forth as his political paradigm.
Maybe that's for show. I don't know.
No, and sadly it's not. He's a true believer in Nelson Mandela. In any case, I don't want to see a South Africa-style solution in Iran, where we have an administration that hands over Iran's nuclear weapons to the international community and voluntarily disarms.
Because you're a Persian nationalist.
Again, I wouldn't call myself a nationalist, but I'm for an incredibly strong Iran. And here's where I think there needs to be a really high level, or rather I should say deep underground conversation between Israelis and Iranians over
which Iranians? Who would we talk to?
That's probably... No, look,
Pahlavi?
What were you saying just earlier about the degree of Israeli infiltration in the RGC?
Yeah, sure.
So, look, at the time when we were trying to plan a coup in Tehran, we were told that a third of the armed forces, including the IRGC, would be up for a move like that. So there's a lot of potential dialogue partners inside the military-industrial complex of Iran. The question is, what do you want to...
Lots of people don't want to lose their villas and millions of dollars.
Yeah. The question is, how are you going to open those negotiations and what should policy be? I would say, frankly, fuck the international community. I mean, Israel should be the last country to care about what the international community thinks. Or what the United Nations...
We have jobs for you in the Trump administration, if that's your...
Or what the United Nations wants to see happen with Iran's nuclear weapons. Israel should be interested in negotiating a nuclear policy that mutually benefits Iran and Israel after the change of regime, and putting into place a workable security infrastructure for potential nuclear collaboration between Iran and Israel moving forward.
Like they had with Pahlavi in the 1970s.
Yeah, but I envision something even more robust, like, for example, to float a very daring vision here. Israel has no strategic depth. It certainly doesn't have any capacity to test nuclear weapons on its own territory.
It's the size of Connecticut.
Whereas Iran is 3 times the size of France and has 2 vast deserts in its eastern side. So I think a great idea would be to have an intelligence and security arrangement that is as cohesive and transparent as that between the Five Eyes, between Iran and Israel, and have a joint nuclear weapons development program, and use the eastern deserts of Iran as a testing range for Israeli nuclear weapons, together with Iranian nuclear weapons. I think that would send a very powerful message to the rest of the region, including wannabe Caliph Erdogan over there in Turkey.
The problem with this, of course, and this is the problem with the Ukrainians saying we're going to go back to having a nuclear program. Once you open the genie, there's 8 or 9 countries now. You claim Japan also. Let's say the 8 to 10 countries that have nuclear capacity, right? There's tremendous concern amongst very serious, responsible people in the international foreign policy elite from all over the place that once this gets going, either the Persians or the Ukrainians get it, there's going to be a nuclear arms race where there's going to be 25 more nuclear powers in the next 10 years. There are a lot of medium-sized countries, from South Korea to Egypt, which used to have a nuclear program, to South Africa, which used to have a nuclear program, to the Saudis, who have the money and the technical capacity to buy. And then you would have a nuclear arms race into the 21st century, where instead of having 8 to 10 nuclear powers, 9, you'd have 27 or 35 in 10 years. And that would make the world a much more crazy and much more dangerous place.
Undoubtedly, what will happen to the dead-enders who don't get caught in Tehran when the regime finally comes down, okay, is that they're going to escape to these other Arab Shia countries, like we were saying earlier, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. And so I think anyone who believes that a defanged, militarily weak, complacent Iran is a good idea doesn't have any understanding of the strategic challenges we're going to face in that region for the next, 15 to 20 years into the future, after these Shia lunatics from Tehran go and reposition themselves in Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Lebanon. The next regime of Iran, together with Israel, is going to have to clean this mess up. Iran is going to have to maintain force projection in the region, in fact, to be able to go after all of these militias that the Islamic Republic set up and collect all the garbage that escaped into the Arab Shiite world. Now, coming back to the question of nuclear weapons and proliferation, right? And this, is one and the same issue as what I just raised. I realize, the position that you're coming from in the Atlantic Council and the general policy bent of that organization in terms of a desire for stability.
It's a social club.
Yes. Well, be careful what you say, Vlad.
I am.
Yeah.
I am very careful because I do represent the institution, and I've got my balls and my life on the line here. I'm just okay. Yeah. I mean, it is an institution with 600 senior fellows, such as myself, and 14 institutes who represent 14 different institutes who work on different things. I don't know the people in the South America people. I don't know the oil people. There's 600 people. I don't know all those people. I am a paid up member of the quote unquote blob. What does that mean? There's 600 different people who I don't agree with lots of them on different things. Yeah. You understand that, right?
Clearly.
But they tolerate you,
they love me.
Otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here. Look, my point is this though. Yeah.
It's a social club for the elite.
If we may generalize, but if we may generalize, the same elite are very much tied into the financial system and banking institutions of the West. And so there's a preference for a kind of foreign policy based on relative stability and at least securing conditions that are good for business globally, okay? Now, here's the thing. That's not going to be the future, not only of the Middle East, I don't think it's going to be the future geopolitically. With the rise of the BRICS bloc and, Chinese aspirations for global hegemony, we are headed for a civilizational war, an intercivilizational war. This is something that I think is inevitable at this point. And we're going to be dealing with confronting The Chinese, with their Confucianist mentality.
That is a very different thing that we're operating on.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Chinese, when their Confucianist mentality, we're dealing with the Orthodox bloc led by Russia, and we're going to be dealing with the Sunni Islamic world. And these are all civilizational rivals of the West, of a collapsing West, a West that is decohering, both in the direction of woke leftist discourse and in the direction of a very reactionary right-wing traditionalism. So we're seeing this social
no consensus on what our purpose is.
Yes. So the collapsing West is now facing at least 2-3 civilizational rivals. And the next regime of Iran is perfectly poised, both in terms of its civilizational history and in terms of its geostrategic situation, to be a bulwark against these civilizational rivals of the West. And also the greatest ally of Israel. Again, both for civilizational reasons, going back to the ancient relationship between the Persians and the Israelites, and also in terms of just the shared strategic interests.
Grubby tactical reasons.
Exactly. And so my point is this, going back to the concerns you raise about nuclear proliferation. Those concerns make sense in a relatively stable geopolitical situation where slowly over the course of many years, this country and that country could decide to respond by starting their own nuclear weapons programs.
Right.
Instead, we're headed for an intercivilizational war. And in that kind of a situation, we have to impose our will. We have to make sure that the Turks don't get nuclear weapons. We have to make sure that there are not nuclear weapons on the Arabian Peninsula. Because I don't believe for a minute this Neom mirage in the desert that bin Salman is going to come turn Saudi Arabia into another Las Vegas. It's a load of crap. The sociological basis for that does not exist on the Arabian Peninsula. So the last thing we need are nukes in the Arabian Peninsula. The answer to that is not to prevent Iran from moving forward with a nuclear weapons program under a security arrangement with Israel. The answer is Iranian-Israeli dominance of the region as part of a wider geopolitical struggle that is inevitably going to take place.
Okay, that's great, but would this brand new spanking lovely post-Ayatollah Iran have friendly relations with the Arab bloc or like antagonistic ones? With the Saudis, the Egyptians.
Arab bloc? I mean, you're dealing with a bunch of Western-backed elites,
yeah.
backed by a collapsing Western civilization.
It's not collapsing now, but Trump's in power. Trump.
Well, good luck.
I mean, joke. I mean, whatever. But look, whoever's in power, we have an assortment of relationships with the Egyptians, with the Saudis,
No, the West has a relationship, and this also came across in the Arab Spring, which we were talking about earlier. The West has a relationship with corrupt, unpopular elites in Arab countries who don't reflect the sociology of the majority of the population.
Yeah, that's why we pay their armies to keep them down.
And why do you think now they're considering flipping over to the BRICS bloc? Because they see that their supposed Western allies can't even manage their own countries.
Okay, so
what we're headed for is a catastrophe where these regimes...
I don't think so. I hope your guys come to power. I really do. But if they do, what relationship would they have with the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Gulf Arabs, the Jordanians? What relationship would that be? What would it look like?
I think that Iran and Israel together need to fight for the region.
No, but they don't need to fight for the region because the Israelis and the Arabs are already really tight. Once you guys come to power, and again, inshallah, Farsi, whatever.
Allah is on the side of the Ayatollahs.
Hubu. Once you guys come to power, what happens to those relationships between Washington, D.C. and the Egyptian army and the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs, all of whom are nominal allies because we're on top and they like the strong horse. What happens to that?
Look, I think that...
Will Iran be integrated into that system?
Well, sure. I think initially the focus of Iranian defense policy will be anti-terrorism. And, Israel needs this more than anything. For Iran to develop a robust counterterrorism force, as I said earlier, if for no other reason than to clean up the garbage that it created, to clean up the mess that it created in the region. So this is Iranian engagement in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, for 180 degrees the opposite aim as the Islamic Republic has been pursuing.
We're gonna have the Saudi Praetorian Guard liaisoning with the newfound Persian expeditionary forces cleaning
As
up
long
Sunni terrorists.
As long as
Shiite terrorists
listen,
and
as
the-
long
yeah.
as the Saudi so-called Praetorian Guard are still standing in there, what I'm telling you is that my realistic assessment, looking at the deep history of the region, which I've written books about, is that these nominally secular Arab regimes are not going to last. They're going to collapse.
We still have money on them. Like our money's on them. Like our monopoly
Your
money's on them.
associates' money is on them.
Yeah, not me. I mean, I don't write the checks.
What I'm suggesting is that the Israelis
Right.
should be putting their money on an ally that is reliable in the long run in a scenario where they're surrounded by violent chaos in every direction.
Look, I really hope that is the case. But again, if your guys come to power and you restructure Persia and Tehran to be a different kind of regime in the sociological sense of that word, can we have you guys be sweet and nice to? Yeah.
Let me give you an answer
Yeah.
that's very tangible, that has to do with, let's say, specifics of economic policy moving forward in the region, right? So one way to break China is to force the Bitcoinization of oil and gas resources in the Persian Gulf region. Because the Chinese economy is so centrally managed that if just the net oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf region were to be exclusively traded in Bitcoin, it would potentially deal a death blow to the Chinese economy. There would be too much economic unpredictability, and the central management there couldn't handle it. So you're asking about the Saudis. So hold on, I'm getting there.
You're a futurist.
So what Iran needs to do, what the next regime of Iran needs to do, is to demand that all of the oil and gas resources of the Persian Gulf region will be only sold and bought in Bitcoin. This aligns Iran, the next Iranian regime, with certain people in the United States who Trump is beginning to embrace. It certainly aligns Iran with the kinds of policies that Malay is pursuing in Argentina. And I think the Israelis should look at that as a way to deal a significant blow to the BRICS cartel.
I'm just asking, like, that's not a
No,
good
hold on,
answer
I'm getting
to
to
my...
the Saudis. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I'm just asking about what the security
So
arrangements
how do
will
you
look like.
force? How do you force Bitcoinization of all the oil and gas resources of
You
the
don't even
Persian
need to
Gulf
do that.
region?
What's your relationship to the Saudis once you come to power?
What I'm telling you is that Iran would have to be able to dominate oil and gas policy in the Persian Gulf region to a point where the Saudis cannot say no to Bitcoinization of oil and gas. Now, the Saudis are starting to lean toward China and Russia. We're seeing that right now, okay? You would need an Iran that was capable of dictating policy to the Saudis in that regard. Whether it's this Saudi regime or whether it's a future Arabian chaos on that peninsula.
No, I want to actually focus right now on Russia and China as well. When it comes to Russia, which I see as being the dog of China right now, doing China's bidding when it comes to expanding its territory, because eventually a lot of the territory that Russia could end up getting would be more natural resources for the Chinese to use. So assuming that what we're talking about with Bitcoin does not work out, Jason, you see a lot more chaos brewing when it comes to the religious fundamentalists in places like Saudi Arabia in the near future. And what relationship do you see them having with China? And what relationship, unless you fully agree with me here, do you see China having with Russia and what Russia is doing right now?
The discourse that would allow China to dominate not only Russia, but also large parts of the Islamic world, including parts of the Islamic world that are in Africa, where China is already, raping the continent for resources, is a traditionalist discourse. That's the way to go, okay? It's basically what Alexander Dugin is advocating. So Dugin has already tailored the Chinese geopolitical diplomatic policy.
Eurasianism.
Well, it's the idea that the West is chauvinist, the West is colonialist, we have our own civilization, and we want amicable relations with people of other civilizations, and we're not here to dictate to them the way that the West did for hundreds of years or think that there's a universal standard of human rights, meaning when, Sunni Arab regimes brutalize their own populations, that's perfectly okay because it's consistent with their own values, right? This is the kind of discourse that the Chinese are going to adopt in order to become the hegemon of Eurasia and a large part of the Islamic world. And one other thing that goes together with that discourse is a potential neo-feudal long-term deindustrialization. Now, hear me out, because people see these glittering cities in China and they think, okay, China's leading AI and leading, technological development. Look at their maglev trains and all this. No, because they're still competing with a West that is on the leading edge of technological development. Depending on the problems that we face ourselves here, and you have people like Steve Bannon who are around Trump talking about bombing server farms and basically, Tucker Carlson saying we should pull the plug on AI research and development. Depending on what the discourse is in the West, China may wind up being on the leading edge of technological development, and they may themselves decide to roll that back, quote unquote, in the name of human values and in order to protect traditional cultures. I mean, this is Dugin's discourse already, that AI is some satanic, diabolical plot to, imprison the human soul and so on and so forth.
I don't believe that, but okay.
But wouldn't China want to have this technocratic state where everybody is marked and tracked?
They already do. And you can use certain limited technologies that benefit totalitarian control without fostering further technological development, especially in a way that's going to be liberating and empowering to the human spirit. And so I think a great concern would be a marriage of traditionalist discourse in terms of Chinese diplomacy toward the sphere where it wants to be the hegemon, together with an anti-technology deindustrialization kind of policy that's kind of neo-feudal. So look, this is another area where I think that Iran needs to stand up as not only a geostrategic bulwark against China and Russia, as well as the Sunni Arabs, but Iran also as a citadel of techno-scientific development. Let's not forget that between 900 and 1100, Iran was the world's leader in science and technology in the world. Iran is one of the few countries that has a distinction of having been the leader in science and technological development on the planet. And there are a lot of people, both inside the country and in the diaspora, that could facilitate a restoration of Iran's role in that regard.
Inshallah.
So could you stop invoking Allah? You're going to wind up with Iranian opposition people.
I'm joking.
Who want you hanging from a crane in Tehran.
No. I joke. I'm a funny guy from Central Asia.
So look, Iran challenging China and Russia in the domain of technological development, and also trying to inspire the West not to give in and give up, right, and go into terminal civilizational decline, is another element of the vision that I have, where we're not just talking about economics and defense, we're talking about technological and scientific development.
So just to sum up what you're saying then about China, is that they would lower the technological progress to a standstill, but they would still keep a lot of the tracking and a lot of the things that would invade the privacy of its own citizenry to keep them in line.
Of course they would.
Yeah. All right.
They're not getting rid of the point system of the.
Yeah.
Never. I mean, whatever kind of regime they have, whether fascist or democrat. I mean, not democratic. Whatever kind of regime that they have, they'll just keep their great innovations in totalitarian engineering of the human soul, which we're trying to get imported into the West, and some people want that. There's no getting rid of that. That's just deep in their culture. I mean, that's deep in their civilizational, structural way of controlling a billion people who are very different kinds of people from each other.
It's crazy. Now, before the Q&A, Russia, same question from that earlier loaded question when it comes to what exactly do you see going on with Russia versus Ukraine, and whether they're also getting a lot of their money from China. And lastly, just to add one more thing on top of this, whether Trump's tariffs would play any kind of role in possibly choking the life out of China in order to make some progress happen.
Vlad is much more a better position to answer a question about Russia and Ukraine than I am. The only point that I want to make in response to that is that there was such a thing as the Russo-Persian Wars in the 1800s. In the 1800s, Iran lost about 1/3 of its territory to the Tsars. In Central Asia and in the Caucasus, about 1/3 of Iranian territory was lost to Russia in a series of successive wars. There's a lot of bad blood between Persians and Russians. a lot. And so if you're looking for a geostrategic ally against Russia, where I think, again, to go back to the nuclear issue, if it were up to me, I would have hundreds, if not thousands, of Iranian nuclear ballistic missiles pointed at the Russians and at the Chinese.
Hold your horses,
Okay,
sir.
so anyway, that's all I have to say.
Many things to say. For Rivat, I spent some time in Shiraz, and I spent some time in Isfahan, and I've spent some time in northern Azerbaijani Iran. And after I came back several years later, I was invited on a junket to Azerbaijan. That never worked out for scheduling reasons or technical reasons, but I went to see the Azerbaijani ambassador to America about 10 years ago. This is a long time ago. And I asked him in his office in the Azerbaijani UN, when I go there and I write things, I've spent a lot of time in Shiraz. I'm really interested in the 19th century stuff between Iran and Russia. What do I say about that? You guys are not going to like when I write about that. And the Azerbaijani ambassador was like this post-Soviet guy, like old Soviet style, guy. He says, you're not going to be able to not talk about that. That's such a big thing. There's 25 million Azeris living in your country.
What do you mean living in? Azeris are Iranians.
Okay.
No, listen. Azeris are Iranians. Let's not get this confused.
No, they're citizens of Iran. They've been for 100 years citizens of Iran.
They're ethnically Iranian. Azeris are ethnic Iranians who had their language to some extent in some areas Turkicized by the Seljuks who invaded Iran.
Oh, I've heard this argument before.
No, this is an ethnographic fact.
Okay, this is
the word Azari comes from the word fire because it was a stronghold of the majority of the fire temples in Zoroastrian Iran.
Other people in Azerbaijan would not.
It's a fake country. It's a fake country based on a bullshit propaganda
I'm just saying,
discourse.
I've got no dog in this. I'm just saying, like, I know what you think and I know what they think, and I have no opinion on it.
I can imagine the Azerbaijani ambassador watching this right now.
No, Vlad. No. I know what your arguments are. I know what their arguments are. Let's be neutral on this. The Azerbaijani ambassador and the Azerbaijani foreign minister, they say to me, we have 25 million of our people living in the north of their country. When anything goes down, we're going to take that back. That's ours.
I would have him executed.
The Azerbaijani foreign minister?
Absolutely.
Okay, fine. All right, fine.
Absolutely. That's an outrageous statement. I consider it tantamount to a potential declaration.
This was a private conversation between me and the Azerbaijani foreign minister.
The entire population of Azerbaijan are legitimately Iranian citizens living in a bullshit country. Okay. In a bullshit country that was carved out of the Russian Empire and its conquests of northern Iran. Not that I want them back necessarily. Not that I want them back. I only want the Tots and the Talish.
You only want the oil fields.
No, the Tots and the Talish. The Tots and the Talish are people who still speak an Iranian language in northern Azerbaijan, and they just happen to live along the Caspian coast where all the oil and gas is. So I would be happy to have them back.
I called that one.
The rest of the Turks can stay up there.
So I called that. Okay.
The rest of the Turkic-speaking people in Azerbaijan can stay up there. Thank you very much.
You only want the parts of a nice oil. I got it. Okay.
No, well, they're fantastic Iranian patriots, the Tat and the Talish. They want to be part of Iran again, and we would love to have them back.
Inshallah. Anyways, the point is this. Well, I forget what the point was because it's very funny. This is all very amusing. The point is this.
You were talking about studying 19th century Persian literature in Shiraz and Russian-Iranian relations in the 19th century.
I was going to talk about Griboyedov and the Russians and the Pushkin and the war. People forget there's 100 years worth of wars between Persia and the Russians all the way into the 1920s. People forget.
Yeah, they were bad.
Yeah, really bad.
Iran lost a third of its territory.
Right. Yeah. And people forget that the Soviets only gave up their Persian holdings, not talking about the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic, their Persian holdings in the earlier mid-20s. Yes. People forget this. There used to be a railway line from Moscow into Shiraz. You could take a train from Shiraz all the way up to Moscow.
Yeah, I mean, Tajikistan, Samarkand, and Bukhara are also their Persian holdings. But be that as it may, you're talking about what the Russians held within the contemporary territorial borders of Iran.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Do you think there's not resentment over that in Iran? Tremendously.
I know there is.
If you're looking for a population which is ready to explode in anti-Russian sentiment, there's no better place to look than Iran.
Okay, so and if I was an isolationist type of said, I'm listening to these two guys who actually kind of know what they're talking about, Iran, and I don't, but it seems like that there's a lot of internal stuff which could blow up if there's a war. Couldn't there be a civil war?
Where, inside Iran?
Yes.
No. Between who and who?
Okay, like the Arabs on your coast and the Azeris, and like there's not going to be cessationist stuff if we get rid of the Ayatollahs.
No, the biggest danger of secessionism in Iran was that for some time, greatly to my dismay, because I've always been a strong supporter of the state of Israel, but for a while, the people in the security and intelligence services of Israel were considering pursuing artificial stoking of separatism within Iran as a strategy to weaken the Islamic Republic.
It was a short-term fad.
Yes, and fortunately, yeah, it's gone out of fashion. I think that cooler, more strategic minds have prevailed, and it's been decided that this very organic, integral, cohesive country should not be artificially carved up. To talk about an independent, Kurdistan inside the borders of Iran is like saying that the people of Occitan.
I've no dog.
It's like let me just make an important historical point.
Okay.
It is as asinine as saying that the people of Occitan should declare independence from France and have Provençal be their language again. Like, it's that historically retarded.
Except the Occidental people in Provence don't actually have an identity outside of French. But okay, fine.
Neither do the Kurds living in Iran. Neither do the Kurds really
The
living in
Azeris
Iran.
and the Arabs do.
Listen, Kurds don't even have a literature. At least all the troubadour poets wrote in Provençal. There's like a serious Occitanian literature in France.
I love
anyway,
the Kurds.
we can
All
go
right,
into
let's get back on track. Russia versus Ukraine. Where do we go from here? Donald Trump. Let's go.
Russia versus Ukraine. This is like another 30-minute thing, but let's do it in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The Trump administration is obviously very serious about a deal between the Russians and Ukrainians. They're very serious about this deal. They're very serious about breaking up the stalemate between the Russians and Ukrainians that we're seeing. Although the Russians are now on the warpath and they're taking territory around Pokrovsk and they're moving. It's obvious that the Trump administration wants to break out of that situation, and they're going to do their damnedest. They are going to run into the fact that they have no leverage on one Herr Putin. They have no leverage on him, and he really thinks he's winning, and he's moving along, and he's going to keep going. They're going to run into the fact that the Russians are very serious about not taking territory, but breaking the existence of a liberal, existing sovereign Ukrainian political nation. It's going to be very difficult for them to stop that because Putin's all in and his regime's all in. Once they figure out that they're not able to make a deal, probably will go the way of North Korea, where he put a lot of theatrical and political capital into that deal. And then when it didn't go anywhere, because why would the North Koreans fold their hand, he just moved on to the next thing, as he does. So that's the most likely outcome. It is the fact that the Ukrainians look like they're about to bleed out. It is the fact that there are a lot of people in Kiev who would take a deal at this point. There are people in Ukraine who would take a security deal in exchange for concessions on territory. Maybe that is a reasonable deal. Maybe that's the best you can get with a country that has 4 times your population and 10 times your economic capital and 10 times your military base, your military capacity. Maybe, I don't know. I really want the Ukrainians to win. These are my people. I love them. I'm hoping things will get better. It is the case that the Trump administration really has signaled that they will want to make a deal. So we'll see what happens. I hope he dies of a heart attack tomorrow. I really do. By he, I mean they're Putin. What the relationship is between the Ayatollahs and Ukraine and Israel is obvious to me and this gentleman. It's not obvious to 75% of the West or the American population. The Israelis and the Ukrainians are both in the midst of a shooting war against the Ayatollahs. The Ayatollahs regime is having IRGC troops on our territory in Ukraine. By our, now I mean I'm a Ukrainian at this point. Let me put my Ukrainian hat on. There are about 2,000 to 3,000 IRGC troops, advisors on sovereign Ukrainian territory right at this moment in Crimea, shooting missiles, teaching Russian troops how to use their fucking Shahed 156s or 136s. It's disgusting. Mm-hmm. The Ayatollahs are a belligerent force in this war, along with North Korea, Belarus, and Russia.
And North Korea, that's the Chinese, right? That's the Chinese bringing in...
No, it's not. The Chinese don't love that. The Chinese are really unhappy about this.
Huh.
They're really unhappy about this. The Chinese don't like any of this, and they're playing... They don't love that their loyal proxy is doing stupid stuff. They don't love when the North Koreans do things that they don't control. They don't love this.
Interesting.
Yep.
But for China, it would be a net positive if Russia were to keep expanding and gaining new territory. I mean, that's why right now China's been bankrolling a lot of Russia's economy, from what I understand, right? Now that the sanctions in there.
They've underwritten the Russian economy. There would be no war if the Chinese said no.
Yeah.
The Russians terminally economically would have had collapsed if not for the Chinese backstop on their currency, on their oil.
Do you guys think that Trump will eventually lift the sanctions on Russia, and that would allow, let's say, even if Trump were to have these various tariffs, 60%?
No, he's not gonna take off the tariffs before there's a deal. Like, why would you do that? He's not just
not tariffs, but take off the
sanctions.
The sanctions, yeah.
If there's a deal, when he wants a deal, obviously that's one big thing that you have part of a deal.
Yeah, but then the big problem for me, at least with any kind of deal like that, is that if it still retains Putin's power, it allows Russia to, much like Germany started creeping up into military might after World War I, it would allow Russia to keep increasing, and maybe they're going to wait until Trump is out of power because maybe they think like he's too unpredictable.
Let's not talk about 4 years from now. A lot will happen in 4 years.
Yeah. No, but the point is that any kind of deal, in my opinion, just opens up the gap for Russia to keep arming itself and strengthening itself, and then this problem is going to become a way bigger problem, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole, if Russia were to then start expanding eventually. So that's like with any kind of deal, that's my concern. I don't know like what you guys think about that, because if that does happen.
I think you know what I think about this.
I know what you think. Jason, what do you think? Is this something that we're going to have to be ready for? Do you think that Trump is going to eventually strike some kind of deal and then start lifting the sanctions from Russia? And what do you see happening there?
Unfortunately, I do think so.
You do?
Yeah. And that's why, as I've been trying to emphasize, the struggle against Russia is a long-term struggle. And it's a struggle that I think Israel, Iran, and Ukraine can be significant partners in.
With you guys in charge, with a new Iran, not this Iran.
Well, obviously.
Nice Iran. Good Iran.
Also,
Pahlavi, Jorjani Iran.
By the way, I don't want to be a broken record. I brought this up in our last conversation.
Just assume no one saw it.
It's so weird to the average listener that it bears repeating.
Please.
Which is that Iranians are from Ukraine. And this is well known now among a Persian population that has very much embraced its ancient heritage, that Iranians, the Persians...
The original proto-tribe of Iranians
The Persians and the Medes moved from Ukraine down into central Iran.
2,700 years ago.
Many Iranians remained in Ukraine and migrated across the whole Caucasus Central Asian region. Those were the Scythians and the Sarmatians, whose base remained ancient Ukraine, right above the Black Sea. And so there is actually this very fascinating ancestral connection between Ukraine and Iran. It's the ancestral Iranian homeland. And there's a whole discourse that could develop around that. And there are certain ties that have already been made between Ukrainian nationalists and Iranian nationalists, which we can discuss privately.
This right here.
Yeah.
This is us right here.
And on the last note on that point, you were mentioning how Ukrainians, I think very rightly, are aggrieved that they made this agreement to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for Western security guarantees.
Exchange for nothing.
To be, worthless.
Worthless.
So now it's very difficult for Ukraine to redevelop nuclear weapons with Russia breathing down its neck, like literally right there underneath the Russians. But, if there were a tripartite agreement between, let's say, Israel and the next regime of Iran and Ukraine, there are ways that could be done, ways that would be similar to what Iran, South Africa, and Israel were trying to do in the 1970s.
Love it. I mean, it's great. That's great. As a Ukrainian Jewish nationalist from Bukhara, I love it. I love it. I love it. But we have a long way to go, and you have to get rid of the Ayatollahs first, man.
So going back to the beginning here, you guys said you were a little bit disappointed with the incoming administration's stance, where they're going to pursue diplomatic solutions to the current conflict in the Middle East. So just briefly, what are one or two things that you would immediately, in your mind, like to see the Trump administration implement instead?
That's a great question. That's a lovely question. That's a wonderful question. I would love for them to take the Obama-Biden handcuffs off of the Israelis and just say to the Israelis, you can do whatever you want, whatever you think you need to do in order to deal with. Because there's a guy named Amos Hochstein, who is a Biden administration functionary. He's flying around, a State Department guy, making sure that the conflict doesn't get out of hand. His job is to say to the Iranian, through intermediaries to Iran, you don't get to shoot at that. You don't get to shoot at the Israelis and demon at the nuclear stuff. And he says to the Israelis, you can shoot this, you can blow up their military installations, but you don't get to shoot the oil and gas stuff. You don't get to shoot at the IRGC bases. So basically the State Department has a huge hand in making sure that this doesn't get out of hand and doesn't get into a protracted shooting war where there are unforeseen consequences. First thing is just say to the Israelis and their Arab allies, do what you have to do in order to take away deterrence from the Ayatollahs. Just let the Israelis and the Arabs, our Arab allies, take out the regime or do whatever they need to do. It's one thing. Sir?
Well, I would second that in the sense that we heard, I think maybe a week and a half ago, it might have even been less than that Trump and Netanyahu met 3 times, that they had met 3 times by 2.5 weeks ago, and that supposedly Trump had told Netanyahu, you can do anything you want within the next 2 months. Okay, that he basically said, look,
get this over with by the time I'm inaugurated.
Get it over with by the time I'm inaugurated.
Yeah, do what you need to do now, but I don't want problems when I'm president.
That doesn't mean the whole thing will be done by them, but it means giving Israel the capacity to set a chain reaction in motion, to create conditions where the genie can't be put back in the bottle, where by the time Trump comes in mid to late January, the regime is in free fall. All right, that's what needs to happen. But then, like last week, the news is that Trump passed a message through Iraq to the Ayatollahs saying, don't hit anything in Israel until I've had a chance to discuss things with you.
Well, I mean, it's, maybe he just wants to put off the,
but we need the Iranians to go ahead and carry out this third operation against Israel. That's the opening, okay, for the Israelis to be able to engage.
To go in and blow shit up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blow shit up.
So what kind of policy is this? On the one hand, you go tell Bibi, you can do anything in the next 2 months, and then you go pass a message through the Iraqis to the Ayatollahs.
Don't do nothing.
So this incoherence needs to end. Trump cannot go forward like this kind of a double-dealing businessman that he often has been. He needs to develop a more coherent principled policy. That also needs to include significant support for the Iranian opposition. And by that, I don't mean people outside of the country, but groups that are inside the country, and our intelligence services know full well who they are.
Starlink. Give them weapons.
All kinds of things.
Money, weapons.
Yes. Communications, incredibly important. Starlink. Also weapons in the right places.
Right.
Iran has 3D printing technology. Why hasn't it been used on a large scale to 3D print weapons? There are all kinds of things that could be done right now. Okay? And the Trump team needs to be doing those things immediately.
Any thoughts, by the way, on the people who are in the Trump administration right now, as we know, Secretary of Defense and so on and so forth?
There's no Trump administration. They're appointees who are like they floated appointees.
Rubio is good as Secretary of State in terms of Iran policy in the Middle East in general. Rubio is incredibly pro-Israel, and he's also been a very harsh critic of the Ayatollah's regime and pretty much pro-regime change in Iran.
And we will have a final question about Tulsi Gabbard after the Q&A, but any thoughts on Tulsi when it comes to this specific issue? Because I know that she was very anti-Ukraine for a pretty long time from what I've
She's very pro-Israel.
She's pro-Israel and anti-Ukraine and pro-Assad. It's very again incoherent.
Well, she's also very critical of Islam. For a mainstream American politician.
From Hawaii.
Yeah, her remarks on Islam have been pretty impressive over the years.
All the bad things in America have come from Hawaii.
Well, listen, she's a Hindu also by adoption, okay? And she has strong ties to Indian nationalists. And so, I think we can expect from her an alignment with anti-Islamic elements in Iran over the longer run. Combined with her pro-Israel position, that's a good thing.
I don't think she's going to get appointed. I think that job that they gave her was a nonsense job. I think she's balancing out other people in the appointment in the cabinet. I don't think she's even going to get Senate traction with how stupid her comments about Assad have been and Russia have been. She's one of these 3 or 4 crazy nominations that Trump put up just to.
There, I couldn't disagree with you more. I don't agree with you at all on that.
Fine. It's good that we disagree on something, honestly. It's just like,
it is true.
Like almost like, it's like, you know.
When the two of us get together, it's all too agreeable.
So part of what I personally attribute to Trump winning the recent election is the movement in the country to be very anti-interventionist. And I don't want to make assumptions, but you two seem quite the opposite of that. So I just wanted to ask your opinion about how you're seeing that play out in the future, and if you think that's going to be a continued trend, and just your opinion on that.
That's really smart. That's a smart thing to ask. Obviously, he comes to power on America First isolationist platform. Why are you and I so bullish on him being good on the things that we care about?
Look, to go back to what I said toward the beginning, it's absurd to imagine that there would ever need to be an American ground campaign in Iran. I don't think there needs to be even an American air campaign in Iran. Okay, so I'm not calling for American military intervention in Iran. In fact, I'd be absolutely opposed to it. As an American, as an Iranian, I would be completely opposed to it.
Probably a bad idea.
It's ridiculous. It's just completely unnecessary and would be a disaster from every standpoint.
Unhelpful, as they say in the British Foreign Office.
Very unhelpful. Very unhelpful.
The British Foreign Services.
Iranians are
your ideas are unhelpful.
Yeah, Iranians are tremendously pro-American people. Iran is probably the most pro-American country on the face of the earth right now in terms of the demographics. We don't need to complicate that by actually putting American troops on the ground in Iran. Okay, so look, no one's calling for that kind of intervention on the part of the Trump administration. But in the longer run, sociologically, do I think that America will become more isolationist and anti-interventionist? Absolutely, which is why you need to reestablish Iran as a bulwark of security in the region, the way that Nixon also thought about Iran in the 1970s when the United States was pulling back after the humiliation in Vietnam. The more the United States withdraws, the more the United States needs to have reliable security partners in different parts of the world. And Iran is that partner together with Israel in the region. Israel can't handle that alone.
Israel is a small country. I mean, it's a technologically advanced country. Persian population is like, what, 7 times the Israeli population? There's just not that many. Yeah.
Well, it depends how interventionist, or anti-interventionist you are, because some people would call that, having such strong, close allies also, intervention. But
nah, look, that's a legitimate point.
If what you mean is a degree of anti-interventionism where the United States doesn't sell arms to any country in any region, I mean, what would that look like? Like, imagine if the United States stopped selling arms to South Korea. What exactly would happen on the Korean Peninsula?
Bad things.
Right, very bad things. Right. So I don't think that that's realistic. I don't think that's realistic. But closing bases is realistic. Like if the United States wants to close most of its bases in the Middle East, Persian Gulf region, that can happen if there's a security relationship between Iran and Israel to manage security in the region.
Yeah, there are a lot of people, even who think like us, who think there are too many American soldiers in a place like Iraq who are just sitting ducks for.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
You do, right?
Totally agree.
There are a lot of people who think like you, who are smart people, who look at the map and they're like, okay, why do we have 2,000 American guys sitting in Iraq, 100 miles from the Iranian border? They just bomb them if the war starts, right? If they kill 100 American guys, we have to come into that war. And so that's a legitimate argument.
Well, I mean, it can also just be a different sort of, concept regarding security, defense versus offense. So
that's a legitimate point. I mean, I'm not going to say it at all.
This is more of a follow-up, but got me thinking maybe the reason why Trump and Elon are making negotiations with the Ayatollahs is because they're buds with Putin, who wouldn't necessarily want regime change.
Yeah, I think that's probably the single most significant reason, although I wouldn't go so far as to say they're buds with Putin, okay? But
I wouldn't say that either. But no. Structurally aligned in their own
might
head.
that
Yes,
by-
they're
might that be
structurally
the
aligned in a
influence?
way with Putin, and they want a normalization of diplomatic and economic ties between the United States and Russia. And Iran is a vital foreign policy interest of Russia, okay, maintaining that relationship. So I think part of, if there is to be, and I know, you know how you feel about this, and I don't necessarily disagree, although I certainly don't want to see a nuclear war, but I know how you feel about negotiations between Russia and the Trump administration. I think one of the major subjects in that negotiation towards some kind of a deal is going to be what happens with Iran. And that won't be discussed publicly, but privately there may be an agreement made between Putin and Trump to the effect that, okay, Iran is going to move into the Western orbit. We're going to relinquish Iran in exchange for whatever else.
I mean, the Russians really need Iran now, and they've really moved to close ranks with them because they really need the missiles, they really need the munitions, they really need support in all sorts of political and economic domains. So the Russians have downgraded the Israeli relationship, and they've upgraded the Ayatollah Tehran relationship, and that's not great for Ukraine. It's not great for the West. It's not great for anybody, really.
Also, to repeat myself, the Russian intelligence services know that the next Iranian regime is going to be vociferously anti-Russian.
Hopefully.
It will be. No question about it. No question.
Baruch Hashem.
Now, yeah, see, that's better.
There, that's better, right?
So from Spectral Valkyrie, what comes after the transitional government Jason is hoping for? What is ideal for Iran?
I'll give a promissory note. So I just finished a book which will be out in the next few weeks that has more to do with the occult and metaphysical questions and ontology and so forth. After that, my focus is going to shift back to Iran. And the next book that I'm probably going to write will be the first policy-oriented book that I've written about Iran. I've written Persian literary criticism, Persian literary analysis, Iranian history. My book, Iranian Leviathan, is basically a tome about, the civilizational history of Iran. And I've also written science fiction that involves Iran in a significant way, where you can sort of see in a science fictional context my most ideal vision of what the future could be, including the future Iranian-Israeli relationship. But, Spectral Valkyrie, promissory note, my next book, after the one that's about to come out, will probably be a policy vision for, how I'd like to see Iranian society and Iranian politics evolve over the course of the next generation.
Okay.
Now here is a question from AAS, or AS, I don't know how he pronounces it. Here's a couple of comments before that just to frame what he's saying. First comment, disgusting, would rather off myself than see Iran ever working with Saudi in any capacity.
His idea is ass, Although I don't want to see Iran working with Saudi either, but I don't know why he has to frame it in these terms.
No, it gets better. It gets better.
No one likes the Saudi regime, but if the new Persia is liberal, democratic, pro-Western, you're going to be integrated into a pro-American, pro-Western, pro-NATO, liberal democrat.
If the Saudis are still in that bloc by the time this... Look at them right now.
Okay, fine,
They're
whatever.
conducting joint naval exercises with the Islamic Republic, and they're leaning toward the BRICS bloc economically.
Okay,
so we'll see.
Yes, it hasn't happened. In the last week, we've seen signaling from Saudi Arabia.
Right.
You can read this is in the newspaper because read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. Not the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I read them both in order to see what happens. And the New York Times actually is very stupid on this. Wall Street Journal has reported that the Gulf Arabs and the Saudis have made outreach to the Ayatollahs after the election of Mansour Trump in order to secure the fact that they're not going to. If there's a war,
afraid.
They're terribly afraid.
They're very afraid.
The foreign minister of Iran, basically of the Saudi Arabia, basically said they can overwhelm our air defenses if they want to. Any amount of missiles can overwhelm our air defenses. And they've reached out to Tehran and they said, look, maybe we don't want to have a big war. Can I say pansies? Can I say pansies?
Yeah, but listen, to be fair to them, these are a bunch of Bedouins who had no civilization until, the modern West came in.
There's nothing better than Persian anti-Arab racism. It's the best thing. From the daughter of an Ayatollah down to your taxi driver, they hate the Arabs and like the most beautifully racist people against Arabs. It's amazing. From the intellectuals to the Ayatollahs to the lowliest dishwasher in Tehran, they all have the same narrative.
Listen. There are Arabs and there are Arabs. Okay? The Syrian people.
The Atlantic Council does not hear this.
Fine. Okay.
Continue on.
I don't want you to lose your.
Please continue.
I don't want you to lose your job either.
Okay, continue on.
The Syrian people have an ancient civilizational history that's deeply intermeshed with that of the Persians, with the Parthians.
Business with you ever done business with?
Let me continue, since you've accused me now of being a racist, something for which I've lost my academic career already. There are Arabs and there are Arabs. Okay. You cannot put Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt with their ancient civilizational
Let me ask you
history.
something, just interjection. Have you ever done business with Syrians?
Nor do I care to.
I have.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
You can't put the Syrians, I'm not mentioning Iraq because that's a fake country, but you can't put the Syrians, the Lebanese, and the Egyptians in the same basket as the Saudis. That's an insult to go tell the Egyptians that you consider them the same thing as these Bedouins in the peninsula, okay, and see what reception you're going to get. So there are Arabs. These people speak Arabic. They're ancient peoples whose language, unfortunately, was Arabized. One of the reasons why Iran still is so culturally vibrant is that the Persians kept their language. Language is the matrix of consciousness, as Heidegger understood well. Okay, language is the house of being.
That's just Heidegger.
And the Persian language has kept the Persian culture alive for all these centuries since the Arab-Islamic conflict. These poor Egyptians, the Syrians, and Lebanese, the Phoenicians, they lost their language. So they can't put them in the same basket as these Bedouins.
They're cultivated people.
My point is, these Bedouins...
Now that Trump's president again, we can talk about like culture and civilization. Like, the Syrians are more cultivated than...
We'll see. But these Bedouins...
Am I joking? Am I not joking?
Look, I'm trying to answer your point here, which is that I don't blame the Saudis for being terrified, because they're Bedouins who, until, the 20th century, had no level of technical culture whatsoever. It was manufactured for them in order to facilitate the exploitation of oil resources. Iran can take out the entire Saudi oil infrastructure in 48 hours. So what civilization exactly are these people going to be left with? You think there's going to be a Neom in the middle of the desert with no soil oil production capacity?
There will not be.
Okay, so look, I don't blame them. They're terrified.
They are terrified. This is legitimate. This is like we agree on this. They're legitimately terrified, and they're like, instead of being on side with the American Western thing, they're like, oh, hold your horses.
That wasn't even S's question, though. I didn't even get to his question yet. So his second comment over here, which is, an interesting one. Also, Jason, you seem to surround yourself with these J merchant types. They seem to be in love with money rather than the fire of the human spirit. They act like everything can be solved by deals.
He's being very gracious. I'm surprised he's not accusing me of being a Jew, which is generally what I get. That I myself am a crypto Jew.
Look, I have to tell you, as the son of a J merchant myself, my father's a J merchant and I'm a J. I have to say I have a lot of fire in my belly. Nobody would say otherwise.
And frankly, this has been my experience with most of the Jews I've known. They've been actually the most passionate and idealistic people that I've met. The ones, at least, that I've surrounded myself with.
You have my friendship also.
And his actual question, where he says, "Okay, a sincere."
Anti-Semite. I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry, dude. Whoever you are, AAS, ASS, like
the SS is specifically important.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. ASS, AAS.
Self-identified ass.
Self-identified ass, donkey, whatever you are. Jews are very different. Like, no one would accuse me of
don't give this guy the dignity of a prolonged response.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, no, you're right.
I mean, his last question, which we could ignore, but I just want to say for the hell of it. Okay, a sincere question, sincere one this time. Are you all getting high off of your own propaganda? This just seems like 2 hours of wishful thinking, yet results on the ground tell a different story. Unfortunately.
What results are we talking about? The fact that the Israelis were basically talked out of knocking out the Iranian oil system by the Obama people and the Biden administration. They were. They wanted to take out, they were willing to take out the Iranian oil system. They could have done it in 10 minutes. They took out the air defense systems of Tehran and Iran, Persia, the Ayatollah's regime, the Republic of Islamic Republic, whatever you want to call it, has no defense system whatsoever. I could fly in on a little birdie plane now and drop a bomb on whatever I wanted to. Anybody could. It is by the grace of the people in the State Department that the Israelis did not go further. So it's just a simple answer.
Also, if you want to talk about facts on the ground, Tehran and other major Iranian cities have graffiti all over the walls saying Israel hit them hard. Okay, death to the Ayatollahs, etc. And I don't think there's a politician more popular in Iran today than Bibi Netanyahu. That's also a fact.
And one final response from S. I'm not anti-Semitic. I specify J merchants, not Jews in general.
Let me make another point in response to this, to actually do something with this ass, okay, since you gave him any airtime at all. The reason I don't find it funny is because just look at the facts on the ground in this country, which is that anti-Semitism is sweeping this country.
100%.
And especially
on both the left and the right.
Yeah, and especially in the young generation, both on the left and the right.
Right.
So, look, if I were a policy planner in Israel, and we know it's already fucked in Europe. I mean, Europe's been anti-Semitic for a long time. So if you look at the facts on the ground in the West is not a long-term reliable ally of the State of Israel. Matter of fact, Israel has no real friends in the world, except for this one country, which has a 2,500-year relationship with the Jews and has a perfect strategic interest alignment with Israel. So I rest my case.
When you come to power and your people come to power, I hope that is the case. Even if you don't actually care about my people, whoever my people are, the Jews, if you don't care about the Jews, any country that gives in to the psychosis of anti-Semitism has no future. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory and a brain disease. And even if you don't care about the Jews, it is a heuristic for being a psychotic. And countries which have a vibrant Jewish history, like Egypt or Iraq, who have given in to psychosis about the Jews and got rid of every single one of their Jews. Afghanistan has no Jews. Iraq has no Jews. Egypt has no Jews. Those countries also, not uncoincidentally, have no future. Unlike our friends in Iran, who still have not gotten rid of their Jews out of superstition or vestigial cosmopolitan ethics or for whatever reason, a country that still has Jews, as Iran does, and as America does, has a future, because this is a heuristic for not being a terrible, fucked up, terminally screwed up place, okay? So even if you don't care about the J merchants or whatever these anti-Semites say, not being a totally screwed up country is probably a good idea.
Yeah. And also, I think it's important for a lot of this stuff to get out beyond the Patreon and onto YouTube for a lot of the wallflowers to see it, is because these conversations do occur a lot online, but usually I don't really see a lot of the people on the Jewish side giving a lot of sense as to, well, why should we care about, these people? We have all these internal problems going on here. I would say that the battle against Jews is also like the battle against smart people in general, because whenever you have any kind of movement like communism, for instance,
fascism.
Yeah, well, specifically with like communism to a greater extent, you would have people who are smart but not smart enough to know that this is a horrible, horrible idea, who would start to attain positions of leadership within those movements because they're really good at what they do. They had, a nice family that looked after them when they were growing up. So, they had a lot more of a potential to be good at doing bad things, just like others who are also, growing up in the same environment have the potential to do a lot of good things. And so then people see, well, who are the people who are in those positions? And they lump all the smart people who happen to be Jewish together into this particular archetype that they want to slay. So it is a perennial problem, but I don't really see a lot of people who are, let's say, on the side of the Jews explaining it in that particular way. People seem to go too much into the defensive and not really expand on what exactly we're talking about here.
Anti-Semitism is a stupid thing. It's like it's a brain rotting disease. Not just because I'm Jewish, it's bad for you. I explained this once to a friend of mine who's a member of the House of Lords. in the UK. He was like, so why should I care about this? He was playing a facetious, word game. I said to him, the fact that you have Jews who are happy and secure and healthy and prosperous in your society is an indicator that your society is free, open, wealthy, healthy, and smart. The fact that you take care of a minority like that is an indicator that you're taking care of other minorities. It's an indicator that your society has everything that you need to do in order to be a healthy and wealthy and safe society. So just anti-Semitism is stupid, not just because I'm a Jew. It's just bad for you. It's just like you shouldn't do it not because it's bad for the Jews. You should not do it because it's bad for not being crazy and not being like insane. Okay?
So let us finish off here. Just a few more. We can go through these real quick. Oh, here we go. Q for Vlad. Do you find the rise of Indo-European culture in a post-Islamic regime, I think you wanted to write a threat, not a treat, a threat to the region and world?
Do I find the rise of... I don't know what this person means by Indo...
Look, what the guy is talking about is that Iran is a Middle Persian form of the word Aryana, okay? Iranian identity is Aryan identity.
The Indo-European, that's what he means.
Indo-European is a post-World War II euphemism for Aryan identity, okay? And the fact of the matter is...
Pre-World War II.
No, post-World War II.
Post-World War II.
If you look back, like, before World War II, throughout the 19th century and so forth, some people used the term Indo-European in linguistics, but the use of the term Aryan was very common. And Indo-European is actually kind of a retarded term to use because it talks about Europe and it talks about India, whereas the center of the Aryan world for most of its history was actually Iran in its successive iterations.
Herr Hitler made that kind of discourse a little complex. Yeah, that's why.
So the question this guy is asking you is would the rise of Aryanism in Iran concern you? Because it's incredibly popular among the youth today.
Not at all.
They say we're Aryans, we don't worship Arabs, meaning we reject Islam, etc.
100%. Let them worship fire.
Exactly. Well, in any case, it shouldn't concern you at all.
It's not my problem. I think
Why?
Because don't care less. Couldn't care less.
Look, there's an important point to be made in response to this question.
Please.
Which people in the West can't wrap their minds around.
Right.
That the most Aryan country in the world, the country that most unashamedly embraces the Aryan heritage as its identity, is the most pro-Jewish, pro-Israel country also on the face of the earth.
Let them be fire worshippers.
The founder of the Iranian nation, the first person who cohesively founded an Iranian nation, brought the Persians, the Medes together, the Scythians, Cyrus the Great. Is the only Goy referred to as a Moshiach in the Tanakh.
Cyrus the Great.
Okay, he's the only Aryan who the Jews identified as their Messiah.
Explain why to people who are not
Because he freed the Jews from Babylon.
Let them go back.
And, well, he let whoever wanted to go back, go back. Those who stayed, by the way, helped to create the banking system under Darius the Great, which was a major innovation in technical civilization. But in any case, he also commissioned the rebuilding of the Temple of Solomon at cost to the Persian treasury. So you have a country here which on the one hand is completely embracing its Aryan heritage. On the other hand, it's the most pro-Jewish, pro-Israel country on the face of the earth. Now wrap your mind around that. See, this is what makes Western policymakers nervous, because they don't understand the logic of this.
What if the Persians don't get rid of, like they become liberal, but they just have a liberal version of Islam, or they just don't go to mosque?
It's not going to happen.
So really,
you can take it to the bank.
You could really...
Islam is done in Iran.
No, but okay, I have no...
Give it one more generation, finito.
I'm neither for nor against that. I don't mind. They can, people can worship as they like. But if they don't rid themselves of Islam, they become a liberal democracy with a constitutional monarch like Pahlavi and use prime minister, I hope. They could still have a liberal form of Islam, or like the Albanians.
There'll be a lot of Sufis.
Yeah, fine.
For example,
can they keep Islam and not go back to Rosicrucianism or whatever, and just like...
I'm not for... look, this is another, frankly, if you ask me, retarded discourse of bringing back Zoroastrianism after 2,500 years. Like, the Iranian people don't want an Orthodox Zoroastrian church as a national religion of Iran on the model of what Putin's done with Russian Orthodoxy. This is not where the youth of Iran are. The youth of Iran are incredibly secular. They're generally anti-religious. They're very mystical people. Iran is it's a country very into mysticism and the occult and so forth. But it's also a country that led the world in technological and scientific development. And so as a philosopher who's always been interested in the intersection of, the spiritual and the scientific, or the spectral and the technological, I think Iran is a place which could be at the forefront of what I call a spectral revolution, where we see a post-materialist science and technology be developed.
Right.
That's where the youth of Iran would be interested in going, not in bringing back Zoroastrianism.
That's cool too. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that, by the way.
Big distinction here. Big distinction. Zarathustra himself would not be in favor of bringing back Zoroastrianism. Zarathustra, as a philosopher, will be, I think, one of the pillars of Iranian identity moving forward into the future. Already is. But the youth of Iran don't want to replace one religious orthodoxy with another. Okay? And I would say, and I've written a tome arguing this, Iranian Leviathan, that if you wanted to identify a single prevailing religious spirit in today's Iran, it's not Zoroastrian, it's Mithraic. And what that means could be the subject of a whole conversation.
Like to our viewers watching at home, that's a Jorjani position. That's not a
Vlad position.
That's no. I couldn't care less. I don't even know. Couldn't care less. I'm a Jew from Central Asia. I'm a Ukrainian nationalist. This is, to me, is fascinating, and I've spent time in Iran, and this is cool. I don't know. I don't care. I don't have a dog in this fight. However you want to organize your society after liberals or Democrats or monarchists come to power. Cool. I want to be your friend. I want you to not finance
listen,
terrorism
the reason it's important is because you want, in Iran that's going to be a major geopolitical player,
right,
has to be an Iran that has a certain cosmopolitan vision and an openness to the world. Right. And an Iran that adopts a cobwebbed, religion that's been dead for, 1,300 years.
40,000 people who practice it, or something like that?
Yeah, look, again.
It's not a real religion anymore, right?
Zoroastrianism as an orthodox organized religion is pretty much dead.
No, Zoroastrians outside of Iran are numerous. Inside,
but they're Iranian.
Sure. Inside the country, they've been so repressed that there's not that many of them.
You have to draw a distinction, Vlad.
Between it's a diaspora religion at this point.
You have to draw what I mean? Not exactly. You have to draw a distinction, though, between the minuscule minority of Orthodox Zoroastrians in Iran,
right,
and the number of people who, in a census, if you took a census 5 years after the collapse of the Islamic Republic, and you put Zoroastrian on there, of course, that wouldn't be the term used.
It's like an identity thing.
Yeah. You would get 30% or something like that.
Yeah, but they don't
actually do anything. Now, does that mean they want an Orthodox Church of Zoroastrianism to be established? Absolutely not.
They don't even know what Zoroastrianism is, those people.
The same kids who tattoo the Farvahar, the Zoroastrian symbol, on their shoulders and their chest.
Zero understanding of Zoroastrian theology.
They're metalheads. They're into death metal. They're in a Western cultural context, you'd call them Satanists. They are vehemently anti-Islamic, countercultural people.
Yeah, but they don't actually know anything about Zoroastrian theology.
No, they do.
Do they?
They do. And if you know anything about Zoroastrian theology, meaning understand the teachings of Zarathustra, you would reject Orthodox Zoroastrianism. Cool. That's a whole conversation.
How many of those people are there is the question.
A lot.
Like 10% of the population?
No, I would say, again, going back to what I said about the census, if you take a census 5 years after the fall of the Islamic Republic, you have Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and whatever else on there as options. About 30% of Iranians would say we're Zoroastrian.
To me, this is speculative.
I can back that. But about 30% of Iranians would say that.
No. The Ayatollahs have been extraordinarily effective at repressing this religion. They have.
Again, you're making a mistake here.
Okay.
They've repressed the Orthodox Zoroastrians.
Right.
Which in India they call them Parsis. Right. The number of youth who would say in a census, yes, I identify with Zarathustra. It's like huge.
Saying the number of youth in America who identify with a religion of like I don't know, Britney Spears.
No, it's not the same at all. No, it's not the same. It's not the same at all, and it's for an important reason. It's not the same at all.
Right.
And again, we don't have the scope to unpack this here. But here's the reason why it's significant is because these same youth who would check off the box Zoroastrian, they're essentially Satanists, to put it in a Western context. Because you have to also understand there's a huge amount of conversion to Christianity inside Iran right now. I consider it unfortunate, but it's happening.
Why do you consider it unfortunate?
That's a long conversation.
Fine, okay.
But to be a youth in Iran who rejects Islam, doesn't embrace Christianity, and you tattoo a Farvahar on yourself and go to death metal concerts, you are the same sociological group who in America would be considered Satanists. That is a socio-political shockwave that's coming that the world doesn't understand. Something is about to come from
That's
out
like
of
a
Iran.
counterculture. That's like saying I go to concerts.
It is a counterculture which has thousands of years of history behind it.
like being a biker with a religion.
No. It is a force.
funny.
It is a force, and frankly, it's the only force
Yeah.
that will be able to challenge, on the one hand, the Abrahamic religions, meaning here mainly Putin's Orthodox patronage of Christianity on the one hand, and Islam on the other, okay? But also evangelical Christians in the United States.
There's going to be evangelical Christians inside Iran?
No, I'm saying that the rise of this form of spirituality in Iran poses a threat not just to Russian Orthodoxy, but to evangelical Christianity in the United States.
Okay.
It poses a rise to trad Catholicism.
Okay.
It poses a challenge to the rise of trad Catholicism.
Okay.
It's equally inimical to the Chinese Confucianist mentality and Deva worship in India. So this box, Zoroastrian, that people would check off 5 years from now in Iran on a religious census in a free society,
That's an identity.
no, it indicates the readiness for a spiritual war, potentially, on a planetary scale.
Okay.
And that's a seismic shift that's coming. That's a seismic shift that's coming that policymakers don't understand, although they
After
vaguely
2.5
see
hours, this is like the one thing that I radically disagree with you
they
on. But okay,
vaguely,
that's fine.
you don't have the background knowledge for it. They vaguely see it on the horizon, and it makes them nervous when they see how many Iranians are burning the Quran, and how many Iranians are embracing metal culture, and how many of the same Iranians would check off Zoroastrian on a box, and they try to wrap their minds around, what the fuck does this mean?
So is this paganism or not?
It's not paganism. It's not paganism, because paganism is pre-Christian and pre-Islamic.
Okay.
This is a phenomenon that has roots in Zoroastrianism,
Right.
but it's post-Christian and post-Islamic, which means it's at war with that conception of divinity.
Okay.
And that, again, it's a seismic shift that's coming that very few people understand.
What's your name, Jillian?
Jillian, yeah.
Pleasure to meet you.
Oh, pleasure to meet you too. So just curious on that front, what exactly, you're saying that there's this seismic wave, this seismic shock that's going to come in the next 5 years or so, potentially.
Look, it'll start to show itself in the next 5 years.
Sure, it'll start to rear its
But
ugly
over
head.
the course of I don't consider its head ugly, but over the course of the coming generation, yes.
So, but okay, then if you don't consider its head ugly, why is this something that we should potentially be worried about?
I wouldn't be worried about it. What I'm saying
Oh, you're
is
just saying
that
this is something that they're not
what I'm
ready
saying
for.
is that if you're an Orthodox Christian or an evangelical Christian or an American policymaker that takes these views into serious consideration, which
Or an
people around
Islamist.
Trump certainly do. I mean, they're in bed with the evangelicals and they're interested in making an alliance with the Orthodox around Putin. And so if you
Some of
look
them.
at Yes, and so if you look at this thing happening in Iran, you don't understand what the hell this is. And it's got Zoroastrian elements to it.
I
They're
don't even
into
understand
metal
what-
music.
I don't understand what the hell
They're
it
into
is,
metal
honestly.
music. It's got Zoroastrian elements to it. They're vehemently anti-Islamic, and they don't want to embrace Christianity.
Is there some sort of deity in the forefront there? Do they
Yeah,
believe in
wisdom.
anything?
Wisdom
Like the Sophia
and the
sense?
force of creative evolution. You could say it's very Gnostic. It's painting
Interesting.
with a broad brushstroke, but you could say it's very Gnostic in a sense. But it's Gnostic in a sense that's more satanic than it is Christian Gnostic, let's say.
But how satanic? Why satanic? What do you mean?
Well, because, if you were to map it onto the theology of the Bible or of the Quran, it maps onto the force that opposes Yahweh or Allah. It maps onto what the serpent represents in Eden. It maps onto the force that the dragon of the apocalypse and the whore of Babylon represent in Christian theology.
Okay, I see. Okay, I think I kind of have a general idea. I mean, it seems like I need to look much more into it.
Like Prometheus?
Yeah, exactly.
Like a Promethean.
Well, it's 100%. I mean, the other thing to call it would be Promethean. And how the myth of Prometheus in its original form comes from Iran, that's a whole other conversation.
Now that's fascinating, and if it's true, it's a very serious political, theological thing. I don't think that Orthodox Zoroastrianism is coming back. There's just not enough.
I just agreed with you. I just agreed with you, yeah.
I mean, like outside of, there are some people in Mashdad who do this, right?
It's dead, man. It's a mummy. And,
what I'm
anyone
saying.
who thinks that that mummy's going to get up and become the official religion of Iran again is
It's for
delusional.
tourists.
Yes, we have a question from Watermelon Mained. Jason's got another book coming out. Awesome. Can you tease any more about it?
It's a book about Satan.
Okay.
There we go.
Cool.
All right, let's move on over here. This is from Spectral Valkyrie. I want to ask about the Anubis blow-up balloon so bad. Like, why is he here? So I just saw this randomly on Etsy, and I decided, you know what? This is a nice mythological-looking balloon here, and it matches really well in terms of the angle of the chair. So compositionally, it works really well to fill in the space. You know, it ties the room together, like from, what was that movie? The Coen Brothers movie, Big Lebowski.
I have no problem with Anubis, so
There we go. It works out. Okay, so then the final ones over here. This is from El Shasur. These may be off topic, but Jorjani has mentioned he plans on writing a book on Stanley Kubrick. What does he think about Kubrick's attempt to make a movie on Napoleon? And then he says, I mentioned Napoleon because it appears hero worship is coming back. Are there any dangerous sentiments, Hitler and Stalin, or can it be redirected into a positive path, Cyrus and David?
So I had at one point thought of writing a book about Kubrick. I hope maybe someday I would be able to get back to that idea. On his deeper question, my answer is yes.
I agree. Yes. The theory of the great man in history has really come back in the last 5 years. Throughout the last 50, even 70 years in historiography, all sorts of historiographical methods came into faddishness, economic history, diplomatic history, political history, cultural history, history of ideas, when all this came and went, dozens of different fads in the idea of what it is that drives history. But in the last couple of years, the idea that one great individual, and great in the sense of important, not in the good. Putin's a great man in the history of great man theory. There's nothing great about him. He's a very small man in every sense. Mm-hmm. He's a man with numerous deep pathologies who represents the last gasp of Homo Sovieticus, but yet he's a great man in the sense that he's moved history just with his own particular way of being in the world. Same with Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump a great man the way that Buddha or Jesus or Heidegger or Hegel is a great man? No. Donald Trump is in many ways a very pathological man, but Donald Trump is one of the greatest movers of world history in the last 50 years. Nobody would say that is not the case. There's nothing I personally find very little attractive about Donald Trump's character and his character traits. But he is evidence of the fact that one man and his own personal traits and force of gravity within history and policies and initiatives can move the world much more than generalized tendencies in economics or culture. Am I wrong?
No, I agree with you, unfortunately, and despite myself.
It's unfortunate.
But I would say in terms of a Napoleonic figure, the aspirations...
Elon Musk is a Napoleonic figure, right?
No. The aspirations, I think, that are coalescing around Barron Trump are much more likely to...
Barron Trump is an extension of Donald Trump.
I don't think it'll
Unless
be
you
looked
really
at that way
believe
in the
in
future.
the Mahdi.
I don't think it'll be looked at that way in the future. In any case, what I find interesting about this guy's question is it possible to move away from the Napoleonic ideal of the great man to the ideal of Cyrus and David? And yes, I think it's possible, and I think that we should fight for it. That's the Promethean ideal. That's Prometheus as the great man, rather than the great man who embodies the eagle, which is Zeus.
And the ego,
Yeah.
which is Donald Trump and Putin.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're in this time where, we're in a time of billionaires. We're in a time of consolidation of power within one personality or one great corporation. There are world historical figures like Zuckerberg or Elon Musk who have more technological power than any man has had, I don't know, in 70 years since Ford, or I don't know. That you have political leaders in the world now, like Donald Trump or Putin or Xi, or I don't know, like
Jeff Bezos also.
Jeff Bezos is not. He's punching below his weight class in terms of great man history, right? But you are in this moment where the whims and the ideology and the choices and the personality traits and pathologies of particular men Can't think of a woman, which is why it's great man theory. Sorry. Can you think of a great woman now in the world who's...
By the way, on that note, I actually think it's very important for the next great leader of Iran. Reza Pahlavi is a good transitional figure, okay? But I think it's incredibly important for the next great leader of Iran to be a woman, given the nature of the movement against the Islamic Republic, that its slogan is women, life, and freedom. And the role that women have played throughout the course of Iranian history, it's a distinctly female-oriented culture as compared to the other ancient cultures of the world, going back to the first Persian Empire. And I think it would be a very powerful symbol for the next great leader in Iran to be a woman. So maybe the next, part of the next great man, landscape will be a great woman who leads Iran.
There is not a great woman that I can think of in the world now who has the raw firepower to move history in the way that Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Putin, Zelensky have had.
Well, Robbie Jordan over here, one of the patrons, writes, curious what you guys think, because it does tie into the last question that I want to ask you, and sort of the question that he's asking here as well. Tulsi Gabbard. But his question specifically is...
Great woman in history?
Well, this is his proposition, but what he's saying here is, are we witnessing mass hallucination affecting the simulation with all of the strange connections to time travel and the lore of Trump and Musk? Now, obviously, this is like such a loaded question. There's so many things that we're not going to have time for right now.
That is outside of that is outside of the field of geopolitics.
Yes. With great apologies to Robbie, because he's a good friend, but that would take us into all kinds of rabbit holes.
But people have been asking, I'm not going to use demanding, they've been asking if it's possible to address Tulsi Gabbard in terms of disclosure. Just like as a final thing, I know, Vlad, this is not your forte, but just, for the people.
Well, Vlad already broached the subject because where the only place I think we substantively disagree is over Tulsi being appointed Director of National Intelligence. To my mind, this is the only great thing Trump has done so far.
It's great. Such hyperbole. Donald Trump has not done anything except appoint...
No, I'm talking about in terms of bringing in the new administration.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. I mean, okay, Rubio as Secretary of State is promising in various ways.
Well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see about all these guys.
But to appoint Tulsi as Director of National Intelligence, I mean, I am shocked by a few things. And that gave me, I had to really take time to process that.
It's not going to get appointed, man.
Let me explain something to you very briefly. Very, very long story short, okay? On the desk of the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Hanes, who's leaving now, is a 20-year-long plan for UFO disclosure. And the first phase of it involves revealing detailed astronomical, the James Webb telescope, telescopic detailed imagery of alien structures on moons of other planets in our solar system. The second phase involves revealing the structures that are on Mars and on the moon. The third phase involves correlations between archaeological sites on Earth and structures on Mars and the moon. The fourth phase is anthropological. It's trying to see who are the people who built these things, and is there evidence for them throughout Earth's history, and are they the same people who are piloting these craft? So there's this detailed plan, and it goes out over the course of about 20 years. I've had people tell me this who worked with Avril Hanes directly. Tulsi Gabbard is going to inherit this plan. And Tulsi Gabbard is not vetted. She is not cleared for any of this. She is not a member. Look, she's the staunchest critic of the deep state that there is of any of the people around Trump. So just imagine what might happen if this woman, who also is not a Christian, she's a Hindu by adoption, okay, takes a look at this roadmap for disclosure. Do you really think that she's going to adhere to it? I don't think so. I think that we're going to see a potential game changer in terms of the timetable for UFO disclosure with Tulsi Gabbard at the desk of National Intelligence.
I have no interest in UFOs, just like I have no interest in space Nazis. I just don't. I hope that's interesting. Let's see what happens. she's not going to get appointed, man. Let's.
I
Speaking of Avril Hanes,
I think if she doesn't get appointed, there are going to be very serious problems in terms of Trump and his relationship with the deep state, because he made that decision very deliberately.
Can we talk about Avril Hanes?
And it's an act of war against the deep state, is what that is.
Okay. I'm as a minor member of a deep state, I couldn't care less. As a member of the Atlantic Council, as a member of a blob, whatever. I just want to say Avril Hanes. Speaking of Avril Hanes and Iran and what you and I are talking about, what we're interested in, how come no one's talking about the fact that, one, Avril Hanes has talked about Iran paying for some of these dumb people who are protesting Israel on the campuses? Some of the Iranians are paying for this.
Of course they are, yeah.
One, Avril Hanes, no, of course you are. Like, we're just two guys who are talking. Avril Hanes, who is at the highest levels of intelligence, has declassified intelligence about this. One, Avril Hanes yesterday has claimed that the Ayatollahs put out a hit on President-elect Donald Trump. How come no one talks about this? I mean, this was on the front page of a Wall Street Journal 2 days ago.
I mean, I was paying attention to it. I don't know who's not. I mean,
they just clarified that
it was
not
news to me.
Put a hit on him.
Yeah, well, that's the end result of Elon Musk meeting with the UN ambassador of the Islamic Republic.
Avril Hanes has been talking about this for a year.
Toward the front of the conversation, as you can imagine. If Musk is approaching this guy on behalf of Trump, the first menu item there is, you're not going to kill him, are you?
If you're going to,
you know,
like, are they dumb enough to try with a president-elect of the United States?
Here's it goes back to what I was saying earlier about Iran being controlled by a bunch of conflicting mafias.
Right.
Okay. And also, a small message to Elon Musk and Donald Trump by extension. I wouldn't take the word of the UN ambassador of the Islamic Republic. That guy has no authority whatsoever. He works for the president, for the elected president of Iran, the civilian cabinet of the country. Right. They're nobodies. Iran has a deep state just like the United States has a deep state. It's controlled by the IRGC. The hit was put out by the IRGC. It wasn't put out by the civilian government of Iran. Okay? Now, are there factions within the IRGC who would take a shot at Trump and hire, like, I don't know, one of the guys, I'm sorry, was a Latino, and another guy was an American, you know.
Venezuelan drug guys.
Whatever. Would they hire these guys? Sure they would. Sure they would. With plausible deniability.
Take their chances, yeah?
Yeah, with plausible deniability.
Okay, I'm sure that sounds reasonable. That sounds totally reasonable.
So are there factions within the deep state that want...
Whose deep state? Ours?
Our deep state. Okay. That wanted Trump to get elected, first off, but also wanted Tulsi to get in power in order to initiate a faster disclosure timeline?
Yes, let's talk about that at the venue we're going to momentarily.
Okay. All right, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate this. Curtis Yarvin coming in on a Sunday. Be sure to tune in for that for all the patrons. Patreon.com/breaktherules. You guys get it first. You guys get it raw with all of the pauses and breaks. And then we're going to be uploading this to YouTube for everybody to see there. For all you guys on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe, click the bell, help grow this thing, and you're not going to regret it. Where else are you going to have all these amazing people, intellectual conversations, intellectual audience? We have the best audience ever. Guys, give yourselves a round of applause.
Thank you, and thank you, Lev. Thank you for facilitating this great conversation. We're all smarter having sat with each other, I think.
Absolutely. Jason, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Lev. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.